We have Ruth Peltzer, also an artist, but also a writer. And I will introduce you first, Breda. You are a graduate from the Faculty of Arts, University of Ljubljana, with a degree in art history and sociology. And you received your master with a thesis about the history of Ljubljana, Biennial of Graphic Arts, which you are going to talk about today, actually. You are now working as a museum counselor in charge of the collection of prints and artist books in the International Center of Graphic Arts. You have prepared a number of exhibitions in your own country as well as abroad, in China, in Spain, etc. And of course, you have been writing articles and give lectures. You have also been members of several international juries, not at least a project manager of several European projects funded by EU program Culture. So last but not least, you are appointed the first curator for Ljubljana International Biennial of Graphic Arts in 2001. So that's when the biennial was restructured, reorganized, and that's what we are going to listen to now. Breda, if you could enter the scene, and the title of your speech is How the Ljubljana International Biennial of Graphic Arts Paved the Way into the Public Sphere. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Olga. Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Therefore, I have to thank you, Jan, and all your colleagues for inviting me. I've been enjoying every minute of it, and I hope I'm going to contribute to this joy. Hope. My paper is divided in two parts. In first part, I'm very briefly going through some facts about the public and private in printmaking and about the print in public spheres in general. But the most important part is the second part, which speaks about the ideas and examples that Ljubljana has while it was entering to the expanded field, as Olga already pointed out. If we look back to the history, we can see that the reading and the character of print has always been more private than public in a way, because they were always stored in folders and drawers like this, in cool and dark places. They were therefore accessible mostly to the researchers, curators, conservators, and not so much to the general public. And it is like this even today if we speak about the printing collections, as we saw yesterday. But nevertheless, this gap between the private and public was represented by the category of popular fine art prints, which included posters, flyers, caricature, and so on. This kind of material was circulating, therefore it was considered to be more public because it was accessible to more people. If we follow this concept, then we can somehow paradoxically say that printmaking is actually the first type of public art in a way. And if we want to be a little more concited, to go a little bit back to the history, we can say that it has this function before. For instance, in Biblia Pauperum in Middle Age, or playing cards and similar examples, though in these cases the visual experience was tied to another concept, that of the education mostly, or advertising by Catholic Church, or entertainment also. Artists, of course, have been always working in public space, though if we speak about public art, we usually speak about more tangible and long-lasting things like fountains, mosaics, and things like that. So those artists who were working in printmaking for public spaces usually incorporated the most obvious, persistent, and influential elements of images that could already be found on the streets. These were usually various elements from the advertising field. Nevertheless, some artists used street furniture, for instance, or they use appearance of urban infrastructure in order to create their own version of a breaking through into the public space. So it was not until relatively late that the concept of public art began to include other artistic categories, such as performance or intermedia installations, printed ephemera, that can be site-specific, or like posters or installation, or like posters or billboards, and other that circulates randomly in the form of flyers, bags, badges, stickers, and similar. The most obvious for art with a political connotation is that it focuses on social and political subject matters, therefore it needs a public platform. But there are also many other reasons why artists are using public space for their work. Sometimes it can be because they don't have an access to a gallery world, or they want to undermine the values and assumptions of institutional spaces, or maybe they wish to make a work that cannot be bought or appropriated, or they want to make a work that could be accessible to all people. Activist artists often use ephemeral art forms for their work. These are small printed materials, leaflets, flyers, you know it, and they all bear enigmatic and provocative messages. Many artists that were working in the public space incorporated in their visual language language of governments and corporation, or sweet talk of advertising. As you all know, it's the best known example is Barbara Krugel from the history. But today we can find public projects on various commercially available places, not only on posters, but in all places that can take printmaking. For instance, they can be inserts or pages in magazines, or they can be vinyl coverings that are on the fronts of buildings when they are being renovated. In Ljubljana, there are not many artists, besides from graffiti artists, that would use public space individually. They usually work with producers from the cultural field, or sometimes even not cultural field, like galleries or museums and other non-governmental organizations. At the end of this first part, I want to stress out something that I find quite interesting, and that was proved several times in Ljubljana Biennial. In the public non-gallery space, the artist critique of society is more visible, yet, paradoxically, the freedom of the artist's creation outside the gallery can be less free, since it is determined by the openness and receptiveness of the users of the public space. Work placed in a non-gallery public space needs the consensus of a society, which consists of many more audiences than the society of the gallery. And this usually makes such a consensus much more rigorous. Therefore, works in the public non-gallery space also raise questions about the level and the limit of freedom within the society. Now I came to the second, the main part of my speech. Sorry. To the Ljubljana Biennial and its understanding of the public and private experience in the consumption of art. We heard already yesterday that there is more than 160 biennials all around the world, big and small. Some are really simple, down-to-earth national things. Other are global, big, broad blockbusters, gigantic and internationally in scale. Ljubljana, I think, is practical and soberly realistic, at least up to now. Launched in 1955, so long before today's ubiquitous and illusionary theme of globalism, it has in its own way contributed to the democratization of the production and consumption of art and distribution of knowledge. As long as modernist thinking dominated in art, Ljubljana did well. The biennial represented, I'm quoting, the graphic map of the world. It was media-orientated. But with the emergence of the new artistic practices and the postmodern thought, the biennial's rigid organization and theoretical structure became a problem. In order to survive, Ljubljana was forced to adapt to the demands of art, changing all the time under social, political, and economic circumstances of the society. So during these 60 years of its running, the biennial has presented printmaking in two mutually divergent artistic paradigms. From 1995 till 1999, it was an agent of modernism, you can see here. And from after 2001, it was an agent of post-media art. The transition to the post-media artistic paradigm was introduced by the 24th biennial in 2001. The revitalization of the biennial was supposed to be a process that would prove the structure of the event, the internal organization of the event, the relationship with domestic and international audiences, curatorial work, as well as ways and places for presenting art. In contrast with previous biennials, the content of the 24th event brought to light the artistic, social, political, and economic significance of the mass circulating visual information and the fine art image. The biennial was divided in several curatorial exhibitions. Two of them were most important, which one already Olga said was curated by me, and it was in the gallery space. But for this paper, the more important exhibition was an exhibition called Information, Misinformation, and it was curated by Hans Ulrich Obrist and Gregor Podnar. The curators of the latter stated that they had started with the desire to go beyond the museum, to think beyond the traditional categories of art, to extend the biennial into the city and all kinds of media spaces. In this biennial organizer, or biennial itself, the first time in history became also a producer, which is kind of normal. Before it was only a promoter. The curators invited 8 artists to prepare art projects for public spaces. There was artist Minerva Cuevas and artist Ken Loom. They did projects for public spaces. There is an interesting story around the project of Minerva Cuevas. I will tell more about it during the discussion if you would be interested. Then there were artists Natasha Sadr-Hagenian and Rashad Becker, who did their project for Delo newspaper with a reach of 300,000. So did Apollonia Šuštršić and Jože Baršić. Their work was also broadcasted on the Radio Student waves. Harun Farodsky project was broadcasted on national TV. Eleif Elgrin and Thomas Feuerstan got the chance to make their projects for info screens in the subway system of Vienna and large-scale digital screens in railway stations in 11 Polish cities. So in this case, biennial also crossed the concrete territorial borders of the event, taking place simultaneously in cities and the media outside Ljubljana and even outside the country. This has remained constant at the Ljubljana Biennial to this day. It has become an element of pursuit of new spaces from where art can address broader and even anonymous audiences. Between two biennials, the organizer made a contract with the biggest company dealing with billboard advertising to execute art projects on billboards around Slovenia in the marketing off-season. But this love didn't last long. Only one project was executed, and it was this project by Slovenian artist Saša Vrabić, Great Expectations, in 2002, due to the economical reasons, of course. The 25th biennial was prepared by curator Christophe Chery. He saw the exhibition as an opportunity, I'm quoting him, to look at contemporary practices that do not use print as something which is in itself a purpose, but as an instrument of dissemination, conservation, reproduction, and multiplication, even facilitating the artwork to exist outside the usual limits imposed by its uniqueness and materiality. End of quote. The biennial reconnected different audiences and places. The projects of Gianni Moti in Dnevnik newspaper, Liam Gillick, you already saw his poster before, on billboards around Slovenia, and installations of Vidya Gastaldon in Tivoli Park were continued the tradition of addressing the anonymous public outside of gallery framework. The 26th biennial was given the name Trust for the first time in the history. It got a name. It offered 17 complex and different exhibitions under one roof. Each of them was answering to the question of what is printmaking today. But this biennial in itself did not highlight projects in the public space. If we leave out that the fact that it transformed the old tobacco factory into a public space dedicated to art. There was another exhibition on that biennial who was accompanying one, and it was called The First Line, and this exhibition focused the attention on making the observer aware of art in the public space by reviewing the historical memory of individual projects by Slovenian artists in public context. This exhibition was mainly about the exhibition in the 90s that was run by Soros Center of Contemporary Run 2 years in Ljubljana city. The exhibition was called Urbanaria, and it is a very important exhibition for Slovenian art because Urbanaria institutionalized two categories that speak of creating site-specific works and conceptual exhibitions outside conventional exhibition venues. What is, I think, the very important biennial for this paper is the 27th biennial, because this biennial devoted a lot of attention to the spaces for exhibiting. Besides the gallery space, the biennial also addressed audiences in the public and the media space, in the biennial catalog, and also in private apartments. 5 artists from Slovenia were given chance to produce their project for public spaces. I will just go through these projects briefly. This is the project by group Beli Sladoled, and it was placed in passageway of the Maxi Market store in the center of Ljubljana. They used stencils, printing, drawings, and all other kind of media. Then artist Zora Stančić prepared a project for billboards around Slovenia. There was a project by Slovenian artist Arjan Pregelj called Flat Slovenia. It was politically orientated, and it was dealing with issues like censorship and the dictate of politics on media. Then it was an artist, Anna Maria Šmajdek, who prepared a complex action called Early Guest. It was dealing with her personal story, of course. She used several printed sculptures in public areas such as the market, subway, the city bus, and the lobby in the city, maternity hospital, and changed them into the world of art, whose maintenance was dependent on public participation. It was supposed that people would monitor these sculptures, and they would be sending their pictures from their mobile phones to the specially formed website. So this project also got an epilogue, and maybe we can say a live matrix, because on the day of the opening of the biennial, she gave birth to her baby boy. Then there was another project by Slovenian artist Marija Mojca Pungarčar. She was conducting sewing workshops around the Slovenian cities. People were working their dresses out of the prefabricated and pre-designed fabrics she designed, and the products of workshops and documentation was concurrently presented in the shop displayed windows. I already said in 3 cities in Slovenia. There were 2 more projects which were on internet sites from the group Domestic Research Society, who works in a form of Cabinet of Wonders, and this time they produced, as a Cabinet of Wonder, a website for lost and not recognized literature. And there was another artist, Jaka Železnikar, who made his project for website called Disorganizer. And I said before, that several artists gave chance to make their projects for a catalog. So each of them got 10 pages, so catalog became also an exhibition venue. And on the other hand, fundamental objective of the catalog, that to document the exhibition, got a new dimension. So reader is now was able to pass from documentation into the creative field in a single publicist unit. The biennials that followed always included at least one project that was produced for the public space. In such a way, the 28th biennial produced the project, newspaper project called Corrections and Clarifications by Anita Di Bianco, the poster project and newspaper project by Ana Lozica, the poster project by Eva and Franco Mates, and the poster intervention by Fernando Garcia. The biennial's extensive catalog again showed works of 5 artists, international artists. At the 29th biennial, there were many projects conducted in the public space, yet none of them were actually graphic, since this biennial, as a kind of experiment, was dedicated to the artistic event as opposed to printmaking. The 30th biennial in 2013, I'm coming to the end, curated by Deborah Cullen, returned to a renewed consideration of the nature and the graphic processes. At this biennial, the organizer obtained new spaces outside the gallery walls. The promenade in the city park, the biggest park in Ljubljana, Tivoli Park, became a place to host the project Entre Manos by Charles Yujas Alvarado, quite a poetic project, and the abandoned building of an old hotel in the Tivoli Park hosted a project room for a monumental piece by Thomas Kilper. Maybe he will tell something about that later. While I'm speaking here, the biennial is, what did I do? Something went wrong? There is already the 31st biennial going on. It was opened on August 28, and it is curated by English curator of young generation, Nicola Lies, and it's also bringing projects in public space, mostly in Tivoli Park now. There are 3 projects there in Promenade, and there's also one light project on the Promenade. And there's another project in Ljubljana city center on the most frequented place of Ljubljana. This is the food market. Ljubljana people now already are aware of projects in public space. They have become a normal part of the biennial spectacle. The same with municipal authorities. They are more aware of that now. So Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Breda, for this very interesting presentation of the Ljubljana Biennial and what we can discover, what we are informed about now is the great shift between the modernist paradigm, the modernist code, so to say, and the contemporary art. And when it comes to the circulation of production, distribution, and reception, you see how when it comes to the institution, the Biennial has changed from a promoter to a producer. And we have also seen the rich variety of the Ljubljana Biennial when it comes to the variety of public spaces. We will come back to that during our discussion. The next speaker is artist Thomas Kilper, and you have studied at several academies, such as Nuremberg, Düsseldorf, and Frankfurt. Your main working projects are site-related, right? And you have been performing a lot of interventions in the several public spaces, right? And not at least you have created large-scale floor cuttings and printing projects, both in Frankfurt, in London, in Venice, and Ljubljana. And most notably, in the former Minister of State Security, the Stasi quarter in former East Berlin. So you have exhibited internationally, you participated in the 54th Venice Biennial, and since 2006 you are running what you have entitled After the Butcher, since this is a non-profit exhibition space for contemporary art and social issues in a former butcher shop in Berlin. And since 2014, you are appointed Professor of Art at the Academy of Art and Design in Bergen. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. I myself was a little bit irritated about the light because you look into the lamps. I don't know if this can be taken down, so we see only the projection. I would prefer, actually. Thank you. I tried to keep it short. Thanks to have me here. It's a great pleasure, Jan Pettersen, to invite me. And I just give a short run through some of my questions with my art projects and artworks. And I share with Edward Snowden the question, "Hi, Mr. Schiller, can art unify society? Can art play a role in relation to social change? Is there an effective intervention potential of art into social problems or conflicts? Can art initiate emancipatory developments within the society? Are there subversive qualities and opportunities of artistic practice?" Or maybe I should skip this question, as the Queen is due to participate our event. Well, I did large-scale charcoal drawings for some time when I had the impression I need a stronger resistance of the material I work with. that made me start with wood carving, but I did not want to make it in my studio. I looked for abandoned buildings and started to develop self-organized art projects. I did not want to wait to get invited by an institution. I entered empty houses like a squatter, without being a squatter, but an art student and artist. I developed my floor cuts, breaking the wooden parquet, cutting the linoleum is fun. And yet, I love when it feels like cutting through butter. I use sharp tools and electrical machines. The physical effort remains enormous. A floor cut is like a marathon. Cutting the wood or lino slows down the image production. It requires determination and patience. I believe it is this slowdown which I need to generate an important quality against the hustle and overheated frenzy. And yet, everything remains contradictory because at the same time, I love high speed. And I was too fast. And I dream one day to create works of art that are demanding no trouble at all. I consider most of my work, as well my floor cuts, site-related installations. The images and text that I cut into the buildings talk about the very site, but they are also related to my life. I try to create unusual perspectives and context to open up space for new associations and reflections. My aim is mainly and first of all to realize the cut, not the print, the direct intervention in the found substance. Prehistoric carvings, petroglyphs, but at the same time, the house splittings of Gordon Matta Clark are most essential inspirations of my artistic work. It is my intention to leave traces, cuts in the skin of the world. It is interesting in this context that so far I did not carry out any of my floor cuts and printing projects really in public space. I wished I could do a floor cut around the equator at some point. But buildings that are standing empty and that cannot be used for many, many years may of course be considered to belong to the public rather to the neglecting private owner. Though in some of my projects I was able to mirror my floor piece into the public space. Hanging the entire print to the facade of the very building I worked in. Vacant buildings are soaked with history and comparable to inactive cells of our brain that lose sensory experiences and forget memories. Working artistically with vacancy is therefore comparable to the psychoanalytical process, bringing back life to the abandoned places and cells and uncover their history. At the same time, my projects in empty buildings can be seen as an act of self-empowerment. I develop physical presence, I occupy the place, and I inscribe myself into the substance. I hurt, I destroy beautiful parquet floors, lino floors, and create at the same time art. This contradiction, to rise something new and trigger micro changes by injuring the status quo, is like a miracle and a permanent impulse for my work. Destruction and beauty are falling into one. Next project to come in Oslo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this really invigorating and thought-provoking presentation. And I'm sure when you told us that you want to leave traces in the skin of the world, you certainly did. The third speaker is Ruth, I'm saying it in Norwegian. Ruth, because you are German, but you're living in Scotland. Ruth Pelser. And you are an artist with a practice-based PhD, and you are a lecturer in visual culture at the School of Art in Edinburgh College of Art, the University of Edinburgh. You have participated in numerous exhibitions in Scotland and abroad, and your solo print installation, Snørkeleien, was shown in the Talbot Rice Gallery, Edinburgh, in 2007. Your essays on contemporary printmaking have appeared in national as well as international academic journals, such as Art Journal, Visual Culture in Britain, Impact International, Printmaking, etc. So you are currently editing a critical anthology on prints and printmaking, which will be published next year in 2016. Yeah, okay. And you have entitled your speech, Cumulative Circuits, Prints and the Public Sphere. Welcome, we are looking forward.
Could I ask for the lights to be turned down a little bit as well? Thank you. When I met Jan in 2001 at the second Impact Conference in Helsinki, he said, "Oh, you must come and talk to my students in Bergen." Well, I still haven't been to Bergen, so anybody here? But I'm delighted to be here for the second time, and thank you so much, Jan, for inviting me, and also to Olga and Theo for chairing the discussion so expertly, and to everyone who is working or has been working and is working behind the scenes. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll just start. In the abstract for the presentation, I provided an indicative map of some of the different publics that I think print occupies today. But in the presentation, I want to look at some of the terms that come into play when considering print in the public sphere or public space. So in that sense, I think the presentation will function as a reminder to prepare us for a hopefully lively discussion. That's working, okay. The function of the public sphere, a term famously coined by the German sociologist Jürgen Habermas, was in shaping public domains through debate. It was affiliated with, although not wholly identical, to the idea of a shared or common public space, according to Cheryl Conkelton. Print as a medium of and for social formation played a crucial role in this by means of newspapers and books and posters, for example, as we all know. Today, the public sphere is changing through the operation of globalized economies, socio-political effects such as migration and technological affordances, most prominently digital communication. Conkelton describes the public today as an arena of different overlapping social experiences and discourses that are articulated through the continuous activity of multiple evolving publics, rather than as a coherent and monolithic space. This, of course, does not mean that the older public sphere has totally disappeared. It coexists alongside and coincides with these new types of publicness. Here is how Joanna Drucker describes some of the all too familiar effects of these changes. And anybody who is texting or emailing just now, you are meant by this. The once clear line of the delineation between the public and the private is troubled by the extent to which electronic communication crosses lines of distinction in realms of behavior, work and non-work time, and spatially distinct zones. Just the situation we are all very familiar with. The role and effects of digital technologies and communication are often pitched in binary terms as being either entirely positive or overwhelmingly negative. Media theorist Scott McGuire, in his discussion of the public sphere in terms of urban space, offers a much less divisive model as to the effects of the digital. He suggests to treat the digital as both poison and remedy, as symptom of the current crisis, but also a necessary way through it. Art in the public realm was historically identified with monuments and memorials, predominantly in sculptural form. Again, I'm not saying anything new. Joanna Drucker has traced the changing meaning of the concept of public and its artistic forms in public art of the post-war period. She has observed public was almost synonymous with civic, a term that assumes a generalizable common interest. Values which, if not fully shared, are at least communally legible within the symbolic currency of the culture. So in this way, a monument like this one in the United States in Philadelphia would function as a reminder of the cost of the First World War, and at the same time celebrating or memorizing the people who gave their life. Today, the trend is from objects towards events or situations. Artistic works can be a fragmented array of social events, publications, workshops, or performances, as we've heard, especially in some of the examples that Breda mentioned, with the artist being less producer of discrete objects than as collaborator and producer of situations, and the audience being regarded as the co-producer or participant. Claire Doherty has identified temporality as a vital element of such works. Works that are often short-lived, with the audience being directly involved, instead of the location or site of a public work of art functioning as a mere backdrop. Currently, art is site-specific or site-responsive, as we saw in Thomas Kilper's work, as just one example. Also, other changes pertain to the media and the materials and processes that would have been regarded as unsuitable for the public realm, as in the example of Francis Alice in this well-known work in Mexico City. Nevertheless, I think we should remember that it is not necessary to have participatory art as such to have participation. Even what one might call plopped down sculptures have a participatory character, as Drucker has also emphasized. As a consequence of recent debates around materiality, we are witnessing a rethinking of the boundedness of objects. As Drucker puts it, the autonomous, discrete thingness of objects is a mere illusion, and she suggests instead to think of all works of art as events, as temporal, ephemeral, participatory, and/or experiential. While such a widened concept of materiality or thingness applies to conventional works of art, it is foregrounded in participatory or event-oriented works. Various authors have remarked on the crucial role of documentation in the new field of distributed and/or participatory works of art. These include the artist's own documentation, promotional material, critical responses, and fan engagement through email, Twitter, and blogs. And again, I think Breda touched on this, especially with Christophe Chéry's biennial that took some of these features. I mentioned this also as an area to further develop, since print in the form of publishing, for example, plays such an important role here. And indeed, one may locate one reason here for the explosion of artistic publishing that has been commented on by many authors. And in his 2012 suggestively titled Printout exhibition at MoMA, Christophe Chéry in the exhibition catalogue identifies prints in multiples as ideal vehicles in practices based on active systems of participation, reflection, and perception. Where historical models of art, of public art, due to its emphasis on permanence, solidity, scale, and so on, offered limited scope for print, billboards, posters, as we've seen, and Thomas Kilper's work notwithstanding, expanded notions and practices of print and the developments I've described so far do confirm print's pervasiveness and importance in the new public art sphere. Concordant provides us with a further handle on thinking about this, and I will discuss some of her suggestions by looking at the work of two artists, both related to Scotland. Katie Patterson is born in Scotland and studied in Scotland, now lives largely in Berlin, and Ciara Phillips is Canadian but has lived in Scotland and studied in Scotland for a while. I don't know whether you can see this. Can you see it right at the back? I'll read it out. A forest in Norway is growing. In 100 years, it will become an anthology of books. This sentence introduces Scottish artist Katie Patterson's project Future Library, which was announced in 2014. This ostensibly straightforward yet inspired concept consists of the planting of 1,000 trees in Nordmarka, is that right? Just outside Oslo. As indicated, in 100 years, the trees will provide the paper for a printed anthology of texts. Between 2014 and 2114, every year a writer will be commissioned to gift a text. The content of the writer's contributions will remain unknown until the final publication in 2114. I had to practice saying that, 2114. Meanwhile, the manuscripts will be held in trust in a specially designed room in the new Deichmanske Public Library, in Oslo, which will be open in 2018. Now, when I chose this project, somebody said to me, well, surely they all know about this. But in fact, I talked to Jan, and he hadn't heard about it, and neither, and the artist herself, who is actually an ex-student of mine, when I talked to her, she said that she thought it wasn't that well known in Norway. And of course, we have international audience here. So can I ask who knows about it, who is aware of it? Well, yeah, that's not even half, I would say. Okay. So the first writer who participated was Margaret Atwood, and the second writer is, who was announced this year, is the British author David Mitchell. Future Library also comprises of a two-sided foil block print on paper. Its front page shows the familiar image of a cross-section of a 100-ringed tree from a drawing by Patterson with the date 2014, as you see there, at its center. The reverse side consists of a certificate entitling the owner to one complete set of the yet unknown text to be printed in 2114. Along with many of Patterson's visually deliberately unassuming projects, the print appears almost banal. Yet it exhibits its central participatory position largely through the accompanying words. They function as performative speech acts in J.L. Austin's sense, engendering actions to follow. Their intrigue lies in the temporally stretched and materially, organizationally complex and uncertain promise. The time factor, beyond a single lifetime, the life quality of the material, the trees, and the physical scale conspire to create a sense of delight and even awe for the daring, truly monumental scope of the imagination of the artist. In this respect, the work contests the need for instantaneity that attaches to our digitized everyday life, and that so permeates the public and the private, or what is left of it. And Thomas was talking about this as well. In the content of new media, the emphasis on the printed object, both the initial print and the final product, the book, insists on a specific type of materiality and processes that to many may appear as anachronistic and obsolete. But as Conkelton has argued, precisely for these reasons, print with its distinct material qualities, both as a type of picture and a system of reproduction and publication, can function, as Conkelton has argued, as a historical trope that counters or complicates the new publicness and thus permits a critical distance. Moreover, while it is impossible to foresee what the world will look like over the course of the next 100 years, the frequent, either celebratory or gloomy proclamations of the death of print culture, or better, print cultures, including the book, including its public role, are premature, as many authors have stressed. And Patterson herself has spoken of the challenging yet optimistic nature of the project. The publicized text and gallery information with web links to videos and location information in Oslo, plus the accompanying old-style public. You can see here all the newspapers that have printed versions of it, of course in hard copy as well as online, and the new style public social media coverage of the project most likely ensure that no one who sees the image underestimates the work's complexity, imaginative power, and public impact. Taking all these factors together, the work definitely functions not only as a multi-platform distributed work of art, but also as a performative monument, a term that was coined by Mechthild Wiedrich, scholar Mechthild Wiedrich, as it combines both the features of the old-style permanent monument and the performative and participatory practices through new media. But the reception of the project is not confined to the print and the current flurry of public attention that has been gathered, that it has gathered. It also consists of the future book that will produce its own public-private networks, imaginary and real, of readers, critics, writers, and so on. The conceptual range and emotional impact of the project are multiplied into the future, its effects and affects entirely or almost entirely unpredictable, relying as they do on the anticipated content of the books by writers, some of them yet as unborn, as well as circumstances that cannot be guessed. One of the attractions of the project also is that despite the ephemerality and fragility of paper, the prime material for the print, and its limited primary distribution through the conventional format of an edition, there is a substantial real-world component of the forest with its trees. Being part of an art project, the forest becomes a public work of art in its own right, clearly participatory, but in ways that considerably stretch the notion of an event. But I think the work's main effective charge lies in its imaginative networks. You do not need to have seen either the print or the forest to be grabbed by it. Hearing about it or reading about it online, with or without images, leaves a reverberating impression or imprint. Drucker's comment on Robert Smithson's non-sites comes to mind. To compose the work within the viewer's mind meant holding all the pieces in relation to each other, possibly only as a mental or cognitive exercise, since the pieces of the work could never be co-located physically. Smithson's pieces were spatially spread out. Patterson's future library is temporally spatialized to seldom known dimensions. Ultimately, in the context of the current discussion, Patterson's project comments on and challenges what Concluton has called the new publicness by insisting on a larger than the common sense of space and time and on the potential of humans to shape these. Prince, as I hope to have shown, is crucial to this. Okay, but I'm not finished. How am I doing for time? I have lots of time. Okay, great. Last year, Glasgow-based Canadian print artist Chiara Phillips was nominated for the prestigious Turner Prize. Based on a project for the gallery The Showroom in London in 2013 that was programmatically titled Workshop 2010 Ongoing. It consisted of an installation of multiple screen prints on newsprint and large-scale prints on textiles. The exhibition was accompanied by the setting up of a print studio in the gallery for the 2-month period of the duration of the exhibition. Phillips collaborated with invited artists, designers, and local women's groups to produce new work in the form of screen prints. This combination of exhibition and print workshop extends the usual function of the public space of the gallery. Its conventional ideology as a mere showcase is diluted, with the gallery space becoming a place of production, not just consumption of art. Artistic labor, conventionally hidden from view, also becomes public. Even if viewers may principally remain a specialist public of metropolitan gallery goers, and I think we often shouldn't kid ourselves about that, such semi-expert publics are also changing. Exhibitions, events, published online become further disseminated, tagged and linked to individual phones and computers via blogs, Twitter, Facebook accounts, and so on. They join diverse publics. The latter is one of the main differences, of course, between the neutrally, impersonally conceived public of old, even if it never quite functioned in such a disembodied way, and the new publics. As a consequence of such secondary publicizing, a range of different sub-publics is generated due to an individual's varied affiliations. My friend who breeds rare sheepdogs in Bavaria may find out about the exhibition on my Facebook page, and his or her curiosity may be piqued, and she or he blogs about it, and so on. A cumulative effect sets in. And of course, they run all the time. So the collaborative element of Phillips's practice has evolved to her working with London-based group Justice for Domestic Workers, which was part of the showroom exhibition. As the name suggests, the organization draws attention to the precarious status of such often invisible laborers and also campaigns for fundamental protection and recognition of their work under UK employment law. Phillips's engagement with members of the group and her use of posters and banners relates, of course, back to the history of print in the old public sphere of dissent and agitation, especially in the context of protest movements in the 1960s and 70s, but not just, they themselves were engaged in challenging the assumed consensus and injustices of the public sphere. Phillips's project also serves the long-standing function of print acting as a platform, in Conklington's words, for the demonstration of difference from official or exclusive narratives and structures. It also ties in with Phillips's interest in Corita Kent and the London-based 1970s feminist silkscreen poster collective, Red. In this sense, the work, in its manner of production and dissemination, engages the ethos of print as a medium whose function is and has been both to constitute and to reflect public arenas and contradict them. The deployment of posters and banners reveals the persistence of the old public sphere, with print being an important, albeit historically often precarious, mode of display. At the same time, the results of the project are integrated into the more diffuse, both localized and global digital media world, firstly via the web presence of the gallery, and secondly on the Justice for Domestic Workers web page, for example, a Facebook page. The latter parades images of banners carried during public demonstrations. The banner's colorful style shows their derivation from the collaboration with Phillips. Their other banners don't look like that. You have to believe me. So, this fact, I think, may prove that Phillips's fashionably tagged art as collective or collaborative is indeed genuine. Phillips's practice does confirm Maguire's suggestion of art as providing models of collaboration that are so necessary for the renewal of contemporary urban space, to which I referred earlier. The migration of the work also indicates the contingency of objects, from eliciting a more passive, if one wants, contemplative participation in the gallery to a more active one in the urban space, hence revealing and purposefully taking advantage of the motility of print. What strikes me as exciting about Phillips is her apparent weaving in and out of different groups and publics, a jaunty, seemingly carefree lightness of process, and a method of repurposing that can be observed across her oeuvre, and that has been such a striking feature of print since its beginning. I'm now turning to the final part of my presentation, to Phillips's Turner Prize exhibition for Tate Britain. It consisted of an immersive environment, including three-dimensional pieces as well as framed prints, as you can see there. The cohesion of the space rested on the wallpapering of individual screen prints to all the four walls of the gallery space. I would like to argue that the physical, discursive, and social permeability that now pertains to the public sphere finds a more public and private sphere, finds a more specific equivalent in Phillips's wall imagery. The screenness that has become a real factor of our environment, but is also a metaphor for the conditions of our everyday life, especially the intermeshing of the public and the private, enters Phillips's work through the imagery and its perspicuous aesthetic code. If Gerhard Richter's work has commented on the photographic nature of culture, Phillips's print exhibit its screenness. At least that's what I'm arguing. Repeated and slightly varied individual abstract prints make up the whole of the wall space. They look as if they were derived directly from the process of making a screen print by applying blobs of ink to and then screening them through the mesh. And as Philips herself and others have pointed out, they stem from a desire to make the printing process itself, legible. So the imagery does indeed figure as a direct trace or recording of the surface of the screen as its literal imprint. I mean, with the irony that this is all a reproduction, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. The result of are starkly opaque and veil-like, subtly graded passages that bleed into the white of the paper support and cause various areas to remain blank. These, I argue, can be read as light. The overall effect of being in Philips's Tate space was as if one was stuck behind or in front of glass, or indeed a screen. Used to ever-present flat backlit screens, the viewer comprehends the images with their alternation between flattened opacity and luminosity as screen images. So the openness that Philips strives for in terms of process is reflected at the experiential level of the actual gallery space. But there's more at stake. Juliana, is it coming up? Do I have to? Oh, yeah. It's not Jordana, it's actually Juliana Bruno, has argued for and examines new forms of materiality that are light, diffuse, flexible, and permeable. And she also argues that materiality today is reconfigured as a surface condition. I think we can all quite easily think of examples from visual art and architecture that exemplify the new emphasis on surface and with it new forms of materiality. These are, Sue's staircase and the extension to the Usher Hall in Edinburgh, like a screen or a curtain. Bruno alerts us to a new form of surface in addition to conventional surfaces such as canvas, wall, namely the screen. With this increased presence and changing materiality of our environment through screens, the notion of the screen itself changes, as she argues. Through surface tension, both the facade of a building and the framed picture can become like a screen. But, she says, not in the sense of a window or mirror, but as a different surface. And I think the works of Glenn Brown, to me, are a striking example of that. Bruno goes so far as to conceive of this material reconfiguration of space following Deleuze as a becoming screen. Philips's installation demonstrates this becoming screen through a more permeable conception of the notion of the wall. As described by Bruno, the wall's architecture is no longer rigidly tectonic, but rather tensile and textured. So I've employed Bruno's observations in relation to Philips's installation because I believe that the general material condition of our existence through screens has an effect on how we view prints and also how artists make prints and use prints. In that process, they create and reflect on a new type of public space, both aesthetically as well as procedurally. So, in conclusion, I hope to have shown how the cumulative circuits of print draw on and change aspects of the public sphere, old and new. In particular, how print responds to the new publicness. Patterson shows the integral role of print in book form during the long duration of her performative monument. Thereby, her work functions as a historical trope, as Conckerton has suggested, and counters prints and contemporary visual culture's ephemerality. Phillips expands older traditions of print through her collaborative work and literally exhibits the new public condition of screenness in the aesthetic makeup of her prints. Both artists demonstrate that print still functions as a material, aesthetic, as well as an imaginary and animating, political or social, read public force, in Conckerton's words. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Ruth, for this very dense and most inspiring speech. I'm sure even you, highly professional audience, yeah, I mean, some of these innovations, artistic innovations, are new even for you. Okay, we are making an installation here, participation installation.
A monument.
Okay. Yeah, so we install ourselves, okay? You heard Ruth informing us about the multiple public spaces coexisting with the one public space. And my point is that throughout the history of public space, the concept seems to contain two versions, both the promise of a more transparent social world and a space to which we are exposed. It's both a space of free exchange, but also one to which we are subjected and where conflict seems unending. In this sense, we are dealing with two competing versions. The first version can be described through the rise and fall of public space, as referred to Jürgen Habermas and his Strukturwandel der Öffentlichkeit, the transformation of the public space in the 60s. And the second version would describe public space as always and structurally constituted by a conflict that will make it into a space of struggle. And these two can neither be fused into a common story, nor can we choose between them. However, these narratives coexist today with a much more differentiated world of public spaces. So I go back to my seat and stream. So, what I would like to...
There's a mic.
Yeah. Tack, Hege. So now that we have been listening, can you hear the man? Can you hear the man?
It's the switch. Oh God. Oh, is there not a switch anywhere? Try it.
Ja, men da hører du.
Yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, great.
Yeah! So you see, in the 19th century, print was absolutely crucial for what we consider the public space, according to Habermas. And then it was, you know, the ideal public space relied on printed matter, such as outlined by Immanuel Kant. The public space would rely on readers dispersed in space and time, but sharing a common rational project. And this idea of public space is the idea of a world of communication, rational reflection and judgment. So what I would like now to open up the discussions, because now we have listened to you, Breda, who, you know, that what would you consider are the most crucial changes, according to you, if you do turn now to the change in the Ljubljana Biennial, and what would you consider as, Thomas, as an artist? Where you could work that you did not before, and you to say a bit more of how the artistic innovation when it comes to public space.
But I think we've seen that in all our, in all the presentations. I mean, what Breda was talking about, and also Thomas's experiences. I'm quite interested in finding out how, whether maybe both Biennale, but also Thomas in his own work, whether you experience certain tensions more than, let's say, 20 years ago, or and do you see the effect of the what we might call the new public sphere as something positive? In terms of, the Ljubljana audiences, for example, is there any noticeable change, or is it too early? Because this is one of the things I think some of the writers point out, that of course, a lot of these developments that are occurring at the moment, they haven't really been examined in great detail, and to some extent, we haven't got the research methods, but they're also very difficult to examine, because so much of it happens by chance, as it were. Like, I mentioned sheep. What was it? No, a rare sheepdog breeder in Bavaria. That opens up a totally different audience. Incidentally, I don't have a friend who's a rare sheepdog breeder, but that doesn't matter.
Well, yes. I mean, in Ljubljana, there, after 15 years, as I already told, people are expecting those things already, so they have learned to read them. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, of course, it was a problem because, advertising is fair, media. We had different feedbacks. As I already, maybe I will point out this Minerva Cuevas case. This was one of a good feedbacks, actually, but that was also her work that contributed to that, because she's a political artist. She always an activist artist. She always work in deals with the issues from the society where she makes a project. Mm. And in 2001, Ljubljana and Slovenia was before the referendum to enter the European Union and to join the NATO. So this was a big debate going on in Slovenia, and that was the main issue, actually. So she created this project for billboards, and as you've seen, it was an European flag with stars, and the question posed, and then inside it was NATO. So the question posed was, the title also was, how long it takes to NATO. So at the beginning, people thought that it is the advertising poster for the referendum. Yeah. And we got a lot of different feedbacks because of that. But then 9/11 happened. And we were forced to take off all the billboards by Minerva Cuevas because the politicians thought that it might influence the relationship with the United States and with NATO. So it was reversed. That is one thing that...
Would you call it censorship?
Yeah, it was a censorship. It was a censorship. And that is also one thing that I pointed out when I was talking about the freedom in the public space and the liberty in the public space. I mean, how is the reaction of society? Then also the poster, the billboard with tits, you saw, it made some problems. Parents were calling us and telling us that this is not appropriate, so that we need to put it down. So there are feedbacks. I mean, these ones, I mean, are really visible. We are not able to monitor everything, of course. It's impossible. Though, for instance, Anja Schmeidek project also with these public sculptures, meant to be involved in monitoring, but it was mostly because people were monitoring things really, and they were giving us feedback because if something was broken somewhere, so we were able to repair it and change it or replace it. Not really other kind of monitoring like in essential feedbacks. We had problems with newspapers. People didn't know what to do with those pages. And why? There were a lot of questions posed. Why are you doing this? Why do we are paying for this? So there are feedbacks, of course, but now this has become somehow more normal. Maybe also projects are not so political or provocative. Yeah. Yes, maybe because they're also some of them were really very aesthetical, highly aesthetical. I don't know. I mean, but it's true that we are not. We don't really have a system of monitoring yet. I mean, how the things in public space are really perceived. That's.
Do you know anything, Thomas, in your case with the Snowden project? Did you receive, was the reception of this?
I referred to Snowden, but I never made a real Edward Snowden project as such, or I forgot it. No, I refer to him, and I think it's a very interesting and important figure, having been someone who controls public space, basically, or part of the public space as Secret Service. And looking at public space, I myself see, on the one side, I see the traditional, old school public space, and which is fought after. And if you have been in Palestine, for example, and you see curfew, the curfew keeps people in their houses, forced to stay at home, and society is crumbling if this happens on a long term. But at the same time, this public space, for example, in internet, I would consider as well partly public space, can be controlled. One click and you can't enter anymore Google in China. And I'm not a fan of Google, of course not, but it provides a lot of information. And that a government has the opportunity just to keep this information away from us is a lot of power. It's so much power. I mean, and this is a tradition, of course, that the governments try to control the people and our thinking, and to what extent can we undermine that? And for me, as an artist, I try, of course, to look at these things and where can I intervene, and do I want to interact as an artist? And if I use a medieval printing technique, of course I have to think, how can this be relevant nowadays? Is it relevant nowadays? So, but this is a mixture now of questions, but yeah.
Relevant nowadays, on my way to Berlin, I came over this one this summer. It's an issue of art, Kunst, Stadtraum, Kunst, public space art. And the first thing I read here is about Thomas Kilper, because for the first time signed, numbered, limited edition artwork appears in conjunction with Berlin Art and Kunst. Berlin-based artist Thomas Kilper created When We Revolt, an exclusive work dealing with the issues of art, the public space, and citizen rights. So that was a medieval technique that suddenly got known through spreading the dissemination of knowledge in this one.
Yeah, thank you, but it's a small edition, and I was never doing anything like this before, so I had to learn it as well.
Sorry, can you say a little bit? I didn't quite. Was the artwork in the magazine, or
it was announced woodcut in how huge was the edition, or how many?
It's about 60 centimeters by 40. Actually, it will be integrated in the exhibition at the National Gallery here in Oslo. So you can walk it. Yeah, it's. Sometimes I use my opportunity to develop a work like a diary. So I put together images and figures I thought they are important. Harun Farocki is in it. He just has died shortly before I made the work, and yeah, issues on the migration crisis are in it. So, but it's very small, and it was a challenge for me to work small, and it's nice. It's an edition. It's a very traditional format. It's just you can buy it, and it's not that expensive, but yeah. In my other projects, I'm not able to do really editions, for example. So yeah, this is as well an issue. How important is it for us to multiply, make hundreds of your prints, and is this important or not? And
yes, because usually you are working with site interventions, and they are not edited. Well, when it comes to the slow space, because that's the name of what it is, said the project that promoted Katie Peterson here in Oslo and curated by Anne Beate Hovin. But this opened up for quite another perspective, because when I was talking about this one, it's the traditional technique and traditionally announced in a journal. However, when it comes to her way of dealing with the public space, could you say something more about that?
You mean Katie Patterson?
Yes.
Well,
your former student.
Yeah. Well, I was quite struck because Thomas also talked about your process as being slow, and you see your whole method of working, including this ancient technique as a kind of bulwark, sagt man auf Deutsch, ne? Bulwark against the speediness, and yet at the same time, and I think that's also something that I'm very aware that whatever we look at, I don't think there's anything that's, we can't regard the public sphere as entirely negative, and it is controlling, the internet is controlling, and at the same time, and this is, I think that's the difficulty that we, at all levels, as artists, as everyday human beings, have to negotiate, is the contradictoriness of these features. Is it liberatory? Is it oppressive? And it's both, and that's the difficulty to me, that we're not dealing in binary constructs, but and so there's both the slowness of the whole project, of Thomas's project, in quite a different way from Katie's. So in Katie's project, I think it's that really daring casting of time and space, in a way, into the future, that most artists maybe would wish for, but they don't build it into their project. So that's quite, I'm sure other artists have done it too, but this is quite a
But leaving an imprint, she did quite immediately, because she got 1 million, what do you say, treff?
Yeah, hits.
Yes, quite soon after the launching of the project.
That's quite small nowadays, isn't it? Is it? Well, if you look at figures nowadays, you run into millions quite quickly.
You would be happy? Yeah, to have 1 million hits, I would be happy.
Well, but I was wondering about that, because you haven't, and maybe it's just my ignorance of how you operate, but do you actively use social media to publicize a project or invite people in to, is there a performative aspect that people come and see your work?
I mean, in general, to use the woodcut, for example, or lino cut, is not a statement against digital age as such. I use digital media, I invite by email, and I have a website. I don't go on Facebook, I'm not a Facebook follower, and Twitter myself, for certain reasons, just too much information and too many emails anyway. And stuff like this. But of course, this is what the youngsters are doing nowadays, and it's fine. They organize themselves a lot of times with Facebook, and it's much quicker than emailing. So I'm a bit old school. That's fine. But the slowness, somehow, during my project, I enjoy and hate at the same time. So why is it, I have only 4 weeks to do a project, for example, now in Oslo, and it puts stress to me. Have a floor cut, 80 square meter to do in 2 weeks carving, 2 weeks printing. So it's, you're very slow with that. But at the same time, when you are in it, I can very much enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of Christiane Baumgartner, who incidentally is also not opposed to, I think everybody is aware of her work, is not opposed to, technological innovations, but she described the same process, that the actual cutting is quite meditative, and she enjoys it, and she hates the printing. But sorry, this is going away from the topic.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But when it comes to innovative ways of making a way into the public sphere, Breda, when it comes to innovative new ways of making ways into the public sphere or the public spheres, could you be more specific concerning our new colleague, Apollonia Sustesis? Because she is the head of the Master of Art and Public Space here now for 1 year. So could you be more specific, informing us about the project that you already...
Well, what more specific could it be? There was a project that she did in the collaboration with other Slovenian artist, Jože Baršić, conceptual artist. They prepared...
But they used, they used media.
They were in Dnevnik newspaper, because they were our media sponsor, so we had projects in media in newspaper, and their project was one of them. But actually, this project was this was in a way only a visual image of what was going on radio waves of Radio Student. They were given a kind of a very short statements on Radio Student waves in Slovenian language, of course, because it was aimed for Slovenian public.
So what we have been talking about earlier, at least the three of us here, is that the difficulty and the challenge when it comes to documentation, because it's little research in this field yet. So, but it has been some research, hasn't it, Ruth?
Well, I think Mechtet Friedrich tried to coin this term, performative monument,
Performative monument, yes.
to draw attention to the fact that the old-style permanent monument now, if we think of more participatory art or conceptual art, we encounter them largely through documentation, whether that's images or reading about them or now on the internet, etc., etc. So hence this notion of a performance, in a sense we engage through them performatively. So to put those two concepts together, that and in some ways the new forms of art making require documentation, because they are often distributed and happen in different places, or are short-lived, etc. So we know them. We know Francis. Maybe somebody is here and saw Francis Alice in Mexico, but Mexico City. But most of us know about this work through what the image we've seen and what we've read about it. So, in a sense, that is happening more and more. So, again, well, first of all, there's also the question: to which extent do we, do we need to have been there to experience the work? Similarly, I made that point with Katie, yeah, that does it enhance the necessity of being there, of seeing your prints, and at the same time, you know, we might not. I mean, that is actually more a question for the younger audience, I think, not for a dinosaur like me.
Well, that's a way of opening up questions from the audience. Please raise your hand. No. Yeah.
For the...
I think this... You were first?
Okay.
Okay, pardon me.
No,
Yeah.
but he has a
Okay.
microphone.
So,
Who speaks? Right.
and as Jan has pointed out, please inform about your name, whether you are practitioner.
Yeah, my name is Gro Finne, and I'm an artist based in Oslo. And the topic was freedom in public space. And I love trees, I love books, I love freedom. And when you talk about Katie Patterson's project, I was a bit shocked, because for me, this sounded very oppressive and undemocratic. So my question is then, well, I don't feel that this project is freedom. The artist will decide even about our future. So, well, that's my comment to it.
Oh, if artists can decide about our future, that's an interesting perspective. I think maybe Jonathan Mese has got this idea, but the dictatorship of art. But I can't see this in this very project you refer to. Maybe there is irony in it, and maybe artists as well have the task to give you some miracles or some questions on our way to the future, and to not only clap hand or so. I see there's a lot of openness in this project. I'm not afraid about. Even we don't know in 100 years is this
100
project
years, yeah.
in 100
yeah.
years.
Well, last year. It's 99 now.
Now 99 years will we have still books to be printed on wood paper, so to say. We don't know.
Yeah.
But it's open.
Yeah.
And Katie will rest somewhere, maybe. Maybe not.
Did this answer convince you, Gro?
No, it doesn't. I speak about my feelings. I feel it very oppressive. So,
I'm not quite sure I understand what you find oppressive. I mean, also I don't think I mentioned that it was to do with freedom, but you know, that's such a big word.
You was talking about freedom in public space.
No, no, print in public space. Print was the topic, yeah.
But what is the oppression?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes,
that would be interesting to know,
Yeah.
because is the oppression that the nice trees will be cut into pieces and destroyed and put into pulp to make books? This
No.
transformation is, of course, sort of an aggression against the tree.
Yeah.
Is this what you worry about?
No, but I think she decides about something that I think it's a kind of undemocratic. It's an intervention that, well, it doesn't give me any freedom then.
But you know what happens when you try to make democratic art? I think was it Kumar and Melamid who made paintings that were based on was it representative opinion? Yeah, they collected. I don't know the exact nature of the work, but they collected views on what they should paint, what would represent certain publics' view on what they should paint. So it was an interesting project. To which extent it was good painting, I think, is a question, and maybe it was. Kumar and Melamed, two Russian artists. They did it in the States, I think.
Okay. Who's next? No, your turn, Theo. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Patrick, for the internet. I'm Theodore Bart, and I work here. I read a medieval text some time ago where they made a distinction not only between public and private grounds, but also grounds without claims, and also grounds beyond jurisdiction. And I found that interesting to broaden our scope on grounds, as it were, not only to have the binary private and public. In Breda's case, I feel, for instance, is a number of the works that we saw were not just art in public space, but inquiring into publicness and putting it into question and finding out what publicness might be. And in Thomas' case, I mean, inquiry into meanwhiles, this kind of unclaimed spaces, at least temporarily, and then doing things, exploring those spaces as contemporary spaces. And then also the Norwegian Woods project. I felt that, okay, this is a kind of a string. It could be in a galactic dimension or very small, but we wouldn't know because it's beyond our time scope. We won't be living to see this. And so this kind of wormholing of reality and time that can go through, explore, let's say, the boundaries of spaces beyond jurisdiction, which might be, you know, the undemocratic aspect of this, because, you know, it's on the boundaries of what we can consider public as a democratic society. So in this case, you know, we could discuss in that way too. And also, let's say that the sort of modern historical space is now being perforated in a number of different ways by forces that are beyond the artistic field, but that the artistic field needs to, in a way, gestalt in order to provide an awareness and a critique. I mean, being available in a lucid way to what's actually going on in the world and making it available for discourse. So I'm just wondering if it would be possible to, in a way, pull apart occasionally the public, the private, the grounds beyond claim, and the claims beyond jurisdictions, for instance, those surrounded by corporate interests and barbed wire, for instance, and see what happens when we inquire into these actively, artistically, and put them together again. Might our sense of publicness then go beyond, in a way, the traditional civic space, the Habermasian public space? So that's my question, I guess, to the panel.
It sounds to me like a manifesto for new artworks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have an answer to that.
Yeah. Well, it's a
you
manifesto.
elaborated it so that I don't have an answer to that.
What the new publicness could constitute.
Yeah.
When you,
I mean, I suppose this whole issue...
it's a very, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. No, I was just going to say, one only finds out what the limits are of the spaces that are public and do not underlie jurisdiction. I remember reading about the art ensemble, critical art ensemble, you know, just trying to do stuff in the urban space, and we are talking about public space. That's the other question: to which extent public space now? Where does it stop nowadays? Because conventionally, immediately what comes to my mind is the urban space, but that's not necessarily public space. Forests are public spaces too nowadays, etc. And you know, where is there any space that escapes jurisdiction except for very short periods? And like Thomas, mention. And I was quite intrigued because Thomas said, well, I don't work in the public space, but my question to you was also, as soon as you identify space, even if it is private, does it not take on a semi-public form just by being turned into an artwork?
It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
And where is the private space starting, and where is the public space beginning or ending, and vice versa. And I define an empty building as well as somehow a semi-empty, a semi-public space. So because of course it belongs to a private owner normally, or maybe the state is, and you're not allowed and entitled normally to go in, just like breathing in and out. There's a door, and maybe you squat and you take it, and then you have a banner, like the classic format of taking space. Even then, it's a semi-public space. And
these abandoned
of course,
buildings are
this is referring to buildings. And just nowadays, if we see how, for example, in Hungary they protect the border, so the border is as well part of the public space, and it's fought for. So it's always a fight. How can we open it? To what extent can we open it? And to what extent do we need a protection? What do we protect? Against what elements do we protect? And so on. These are issues to be debated. And I wish, of course, a society which is fairly open as possible. But of course I want as well to have the space for intimacy and not to be with you 24 hours.
Well,
Could I just have a brief comment? Because I think that the grounds beyond jurisdiction, examples of that would be like the transatlantic trade agreements, where courts of arbitration are private and not suggestively not under the state of law. I mean the national courts, and that in a way the large corporate interests that are cropping up in various associations with state capitalism, but not necessarily under national jurisdiction, could create in big areas of grounds beyond jurisdiction, possibly, and not maybe applicable to Europe, but certainly to the third world and the relations of exploitations that exist there. And then to Thomas, I'd like to say that shutting of the internet is one thing, and then listening in on the big hubs is another one. And to me, that is also bordering onto, the grounds beyond jurisdiction. It's a little bit dystopic turn of discussion, I agree, but I think that these areas need to be, in a way, part of our discussions in art and public space.
Yeah, I mean, if you produce a work for a media space, for instance, as a newspaper like page, it also has to be privately read, because you can skip it. You don't even see it while you're browsing for newspaper. And it was, it's that we as a producer, we are trying those limits. As I told, it's not so easy to get the information back. But I think we will develop a kind of strategy. I hope we will. Otherwise, it's not really worth to do it, because we don't know who our audiences are. But it's also, for instance, we tried at the 27th Biennial also use private apartments and open them up as a public space. That was a big thing to do, because it was very difficult, but it was not private apartment of mine or of a staff or something. We really wanted to have apartments in Ljubljana, in the city, not far around, so that they could be visited. Of course, now here we really reach this border, because you cannot open up private apartment as a gallery space, because people cannot really be home all the time and waiting for visitors. So you have to make a system. And it was very much criticized because only those people who were really very attentive find out when those visits will be. So they were really limited. So yeah, it's an interesting debate.
Hi, I'm Walter Ruth from Göteborg, Sweden. I'm the chairman of the Artists Collective workshop there. I'm an artist myself, but I'm also a scientist. I have a question regarding to you. You mentioned that the biennial has become more of a producer, and earlier you were a promoter. I think we have a problem here. This can be compared to cultural politics. It can be compared to what has happened with some financing agencies for research in natural sciences, in human sciences, and now it turns into art. That in Sweden we have a notion that cultural politicians should be hands-off. They should not decide what that should be made, what art should be done. I think when a resourceful event such as a biennial starts to decide what it should be about, then this can be problematic. I think this is an issue that has to be discussed.
But
yeah, well, thank you. I'm not a cultural politician, neither is the organizer of the biennial. We are the organizers, and we didn't turn, as you said, to the producer only. Yes, we are also a producer. It is an added value, as we see it. And we are able to make new works and enlarge our collection also in this way, which is great. And but I don't see this question. This question was raised 20 years ago, and we kind of dealt with it, and we went further, and we're doing quite good. So I don't see it as a problem. And we are not politicians. We are just professionals.
If I would like just one comment on the one side, I mean, Documenta, for example, or any biennial, they have a lot of power, of course, and they define what is currently important in production of contemporary art. Of course, it has a big impact on our life as artists and the scene around us. But if you want to make something really contemporary, you have to produce new work, and you have to commission new work. Otherwise, you only can show what is already produced before. And to make art really contemporary, I think the format of giving an artist a chance to produce something new for this particular exhibition is very helpful for us, and we need that. But on the other side, of course, we have to question, what is the curator at Documenta doing? Is it really worthwhile? And develop our critique. And Hans-Ulrich Obrist or Caspar Koenig or all these figures, they are power figures within our field of art, of course. And we need to develop a fundamental critique at points. And this is important, but as such, the format is important as well. I mean...
Thank you, Thomas.
What is that a sufficient answer?
Yeah, I'm not opposing to this. I think, but I think this question is not discussed enough. I think we may risk of missing the very new contemporary art sometimes, because these very resourceful and powerful organizations, they also start to be non-contemporary sooner or later.
True, and they will have to change in order to survive.
Yeah, we have to be very careful. For example, Venice Biennale, the Italian pavilion, was curated by a friend of Silvio Berlusconi, basically. It's appalling. Of course, this is not to be accepted. But we have to figure it out very precise and have a look what happens. Is the government directly putting a curator into place in such a and stuff like this? And this shouldn't happen.
Do I see some raised hand? Yes. Could she have the mic?
Mooi vriend?
Hei. Møyfrid Tveit er kurator ved Grafikk- og tegningssamlingen Nasjonalmuseet. Engelsk. I'm curator at the collection of prints and drawings at National Museum. And I would like to ask a question to Thomas. Our next exhibition at National Gallery will be concerned about woodcuts from 5 centuries. And we're happy to have Thomas Kilper with us. So, one of his projects. He will have one of the rooms in the exhibition, and it will be the first time that I think that you will carve in a museum floor. Could you say something about your thoughts concerning working with a project in a museum building compared to other public buildings or areas?
Thanks for the question. The concept I try to realize is very easy. It's basically what happens on the floor, I try to give back to the floor. So this is the idea, and to refer to the site as such. And as this very floor is part of the museum, of course, the history of museum, I will try to discuss together with my fellow artists who join me from Academy in Bergen, and then the situation around the museum, Oslo as such, from a perspective coming from outside. For example, in Oslo there is the decision that a Nobel Prize is given, Peace Nobel Prize, to the European Union, for example, in the year where 3,000 people drowned in the sea, coming to Europe as a contradiction to a peaceful situation. And so there will be a lot of different aspects I try to address, and I'm very excited. And yesterday I learned to have less time than I thought I have, and stuff like this, so it makes me nervous. And it's a big new challenge to do something not in an abandoned building, but in a museum, and sort of a very popular museum. So yeah, new challenge. Sorry? I had to go to compromise in this issue, because the parquet as such is not in my space. What I have given is a stone floor, and I didn't want to make a little. It's a good question. Why? I'm not allowed to. It's listed. The stone is part of heritage, and I'm yeah, not as important to question the heritage.
Clearly
So
a space
we
under
l-
jurisdiction.
I make a compromise, or they, or we, to put something on top and carve on top. Yeah, it's a woodcut exhibition, so it would not exactly be appropriate to make a litho. I would have loved to make a big litho, yes?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we are very much looking forward to your exhibition, Thomas, but I'm also sure that you're looking forward to lunch. And hopefully you keep your curious questions for the next session, pop out if you have not used the occasion now.
Or talk to us in overlap.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Holger. It's lovely to be in Oslo despite the weather, but I'm told it's supposed to break tomorrow, so that's nice. I'm an historian, and so that means that when somebody asks me to talk about contemporary art, I usually have to start about the year 1300. But bear with me, because we will eventually get to things that are relevant. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was the whole notion of the expanded field. And it sounds like such a great idea, right? It sounds like this sort of unfettered space where you can just play and experiment and have a good time. But of course, in the real world, one person's expansion, geographically speaking, is somebody else's encroachment. So when we talk about the printmaking in the expanded field, I thought it might be useful to give some thought to who is sharing the turf that's being expanded into, and just whose flags get planted where. When Rosalind Krauss first mooted the idea of the expanded field in this essay, she was addressing what she perceived to be a kind of sloppy fit between the word sculpture and what she was seeing in the real world in terms of the activities of contemporary artists. Sculpture was like Rodin, Brancusi, nice little objects you could put on plinths. And what she was seeing was land art and non-functional architectural structures, things like that. And so she came to the conclusion that in the postmodern world, the logic of an artist's work was no longer dependent on materials, wood, bronze, or on processes like casting or carving. But it also wasn't simply a free-for-all in which artists behaved randomly. What was on view in the 70s, this kind of eclectic assortment of activities, she argued was actually logically unified through, as she put it, terms that are felt to be in opposition within a cultural situation. And the terms she chose for sculpture were architecture and landscape. And to illustrate her idea, she put together this now famous diagram. I actually once attended an entire day-long symposium at Princeton on this diagram. So people take it very seriously. So the way the diagram is set up is she's got her two terms, architecture, landscape. She's got their inverses, not architecture, not landscape. And these form a quadrant over which she lays this diamond of possibilities. So site constructions like Alice Aycock's maze, 1972, would be at the top in landscape plus architecture. Traditional sculpture would appear at the bottom, not landscape plus not architecture. The general promise of the expanded field is this. If you can identify the right set of opposing terms, any domain, however rife it is with haphazard experiment and new forms, is revealed as conceptually coherent. Artists could then mess around with video and etching and carpentry and needlepoint without fear that they were just being dilettantes. The trick, of course, is identifying the relevant magical terms for your own particular domain. So the obvious question at this conference is, what would be the terms for printmaking's expanded field? Toward the end of her essay, Krauss very helpfully offers up the pairing uniqueness, reproducibility, which she promptly uses to define not print, but painting, specifically the postmodern space of painting. Krauss's writings in general suggest that she does not care much about prints or print history, but she is actually right that a great deal of contemporary painting has been concerned with originality, appropriation, and replication. And yet, if you redraw her diagram with uniqueness and reproducibility in place of architecture and landscape, you hit an immediate hitch. Krauss saw landscape and architecture as mutually exclusive categories. Not landscape was the same as architecture, and vice versa. But not uniqueness is not the same thing as reproducibility. It's the same thing as multiplicity. And not reproducibility isn't uniqueness, it's more like originality. So if we substitute those terms and redraw the diagram, what it means is that we have a bottom corner, which is actually the juncture of multiplicity and originality, which is a description that fits very, very few paintings, but perfectly encompasses the artist's print. In one sense, this is a really silly exercise. There are plenty of things to quibble with in the Krauss essay, and a diagram is just a diagram. But she is one of the most influential art critics of our time, and if we are going to use her term, expanded field, as anything but a kind of pompous way of saying new stuff, we need to take seriously her contention that such fields are in some sense logically constructed. In addition, of course, speaking to this audience, the habitual sublimation of print into painting is kind of a constant irritant to printmakers. I know this because wherever I go and speak in public, I am usually asked what I think of Wade Guyton. And the answer, that I think he's actually a pretty terrific painter, is often greeted with annoyance. People have argued to me that Guyton's work is properly part of the expanded field of printmaking, since it comes out of a printer. And some have implied that Guyton's decision to describe what he makes as paintings and drawings is slippery and opportunistic. If you ask him this question, Guyton will explain that he wasn't trained as a printmaker. He feels ill-informed about the history and techniques of prints, that he has friends, notably Kelly Walker, who know all that stuff, but he doesn't. His use of an inkjet printer did not arise from a desire to engage with print, but from an urge to make something with the stuff that was kicking around in his studio, and like everybody else, he owned a computer and a printer. There's absolutely something printerly about his staging of idea, template, and output, but he did his layouts in Microsoft Word, and by those standards, every office worker and middle school student in the developed world is a printmaker. I think of Guyton's works as paintings because in person they feel like paintings. The scale is that of painting, the materials, gesso, linen, pigment, are those of painting. The compositional conversation invokes Agnes Martin and Bryce Marden. Like Andy Warhol or Richard Hamilton, Guyton pulls ideas that are fundamental to print, reproducibility, repeatability, syntax, aura, into the materiality and social space of painting, where we look at them differently. As Jasper Johns observed, things which are necessary to printmaking can be used in painting where they're not necessary but become like ideas. Now, just to be clear, it is not irrelevant that painting wields greater clout in the art world. Money is not the measure of all things, but it is a very useful indication of power. Of the 70 most expensive artworks ever sold, and artworks, by the way, are the most expensive portable things on the planet. Of the 70 most expensive artworks ever sold, 68 are paintings, 2 are sculptures, and they're down towards the bottom of the list. In May 2014, you may know this story, Guyton painting was up for sale at Christie's with a $3 million estimate on it. And he got annoyed at a number of reasons. He was annoyed with the collectors. He was annoyed with Christie's. So he booted up the digital file, which he still had, and he printed out 3 dozen more paintings and posted the photographs and a little video of them drying in the breeze on Instagram. And this got reported in the New York Times, and there was this brouhaha, and there was debate throughout the art blogosphere. Had he actually just printed $108 million in an afternoon? If not, in what way was the one at Christie's fundamentally different or more valuable than the ones that he'd printed that day? What exactly do people think they're paying for when they buy art? If the work at Christie's had been included in the print sale instead of the painting sale, if it had been billed as a giclée, God forbid, or had been valued at $3,000, this whole discussion about technology, valuation, uniqueness, and multiplicity would probably never have taken place. A print that cross-dresses as a painting, one that is unique or hand-painted or huge, simply does not have the kind of clout that a painting that cross-dresses as a print has. And it's simply because when the powerful take on attributes of the powerless, it's not seen as transgressive, it's just seen as aspirational. Women wearing trousers cause much less fuss than men wearing dresses. So printmaking is always going to be in this position relative to painting. These are just kind of social truths, but I can easily see that when you look at something like Rosalind Krauss saying that uniqueness and reproducibility are critical issues for painting, it can kind of look like painting just stepped up to the podium and elbowed printmaking out of the way to deliver the kick-ass speech that printmaking actually wrote. But it actually is not, this relationship is not a modern thing, and now I'm going to do the historian thing on you. Printmaking and painting have been codependent since the absolute beginning. Painting as the exemplar of individual expression and poetic epistemology comes into existence basically in the 15th century in Europe alongside prints, presses, and paper. There were painted images before, of course, but they behaved very differently. A 12th century icon of the Virgin was not an expression of an individual artist. It was a link in a chain of replicas that hopefully led back to the moment when the Mother of God sat down to be painted by St. Luke. With the advent of prints, though, something new happens. In addition to replicating the pictorial composition, they contextualized and explained it. Christopher Wood uses the example of a German woodcut of the Virgin Hodegetria. The image points to the Virgin, but it has this text cut into the block that explains that the image is replicating the real image and that the real image is in Rome. What printed reproductions give us for the first time is the idea of a painted original. So, to take just one example, to our eyes, the Raphael Madonna and Fishes is not the Virgin, but a Raphael. It points to a specific historical person. And since it was hidden away in a monastery for most of its life, the magic of its Raphaelness was worked through reproduction. And for centuries, printmaking embraced this double role. A collector would cherish the engraving as both a Raphael and a Marcantonio, the brilliant composition of one and the brilliant adaptive syntax of the other. Félix Bracquemond won entrance to the Académie des Beaux-Arts with this etching, which is a reproduction of Bouguereau's Nymphs and Satyr. In the late 19th century, however, Bracquemond becomes instrumental in the etching revival that promotes a new entity, the original print. So, etchings like this pointed only to themselves. They don't point anywhere else. Artists of the etching revival repudiated, in the words of Théophile Gautier, photography, lithography, and all engravings whose recast recrossed hatchings show a dot in the center. Reproductions were no longer going to be allowed to do double duty as art. By the 20th century, the artist print formally renounces its defining power of reproduction when we get the signed and numbered limited edition. When the artist's signature migrates from the matrix to the paper margin, it's an assertion of material specificity. It's no longer the image that's authored. It's that exact sheet of paper, those specific molecules. And what's happened effectively is that the print has rebuilt itself as painting. We reach the apotheosis of the solipsistic artwork in the mid-20th century. A Stanley William Hayter engraving like a Pollock canvas is both artifact and autobiography. It tells us about the urges, instincts, and experiences that produced it. Both the print and the painting point only to themselves. So at this point, painting is still defined against the replica as it always has been. But the replica was now the endlessly disposable photomechanical reproduction. Printmaking enters a prolonged period of cultural irrelevance, which isn't to say that there weren't good prints produced or great prints produced. Obviously there were. But from the cultural critical standpoint of somebody like Rosalind Krauss, they didn't offer anything that was categorically different from what painting offered. With the paradigm shift of the late 50s and early 60s, art began to look outward, to examine the conditions not only of its own making, but of its reception at social and material contexts. Sculptors stopped worrying about bronze and began working with architecture/landscape. Painters began to explore reproductions, effects, and affects. The field bulged outward. As production methods became detached from categories, the number of copies was no longer logically or inevitably related to the means of production, and multiplicity becomes an instrument of strategy. The ideal of industrially produced, inexpensive yet original art blossomed with Fluxus, multiples, and artists' books. At the same time, print shops producing limited editions flourished. These developments are often celebrated by myself as much as anyone as signals of a fundamental shift in print's relevance to contemporary art. And yet, to be honest, the structural relationship between painting and printmaking was pretty much what it had been throughout the 20th century. It was just that now, instead of both examining their own internal conditions, they had both turned to flirt with mass-market, low-rent reproduction. And for the most part, contemporary art's supposed transgressive embrace of reproduction and multiplicity has been entirely a feint. The paintings of Warhol or Christopher Wool are clearly understood as unique works of art. Multiplicity and reproduction became the subject of painting and printmaking, but we are in no way confused about which is which. Guyton's Epson-printed canvases, the Tobias brothers' relief-printed paintings, Glenn Ligon's come-out paintings, which were screen-printed at Excel Editions in Brooklyn, could all theoretically be positioned as editions, but their impact would be different. When these same artists produce prints, they're clearly distinguished from the unique work. They're usually smaller, they usually are reliant on different technologies, they're done in proper editions, signed, numbered, documented. As Christopher Wood observes, to represent the copy is to reassert the distinction between the copy and the original. So, should we just accept the idea that the expanded field of printmaking and the expanded field of painting are one and the same thing, that they can both be demarcated neatly by Krauss's uniqueness, reproducibility, opposition? I don't think so. To begin with, there are just too many things that don't fit. Where, for instance, do we put William Kentridge's lino cuts or Tasta Dean's photogravures? These are clearly original prints, but they have more to do with film than with painting or sculpture. The print, as much as it is painting's twin, is also proto-filmic form. State proofs effectively constitute frames in an animation of image development. Prints have always lent themselves to narrative sequences, whether you're talking about Durer's Life of the Virgin or Lewitt's squares with a different line direction in each half square. And the strategic sequence of plan, direction, production of parts, editing and assembly into something coherent is also shared by both modes. Similarly, where are we supposed to put Richard Archschwager's Locations, or Swoon's Street-Pasted Woodcuts, or Damon Davis's All Hands on Deck? These are all works that are clearly on the uniqueness reproducibility spectrum, but they're equally fitted to the architecture/landscape spectrum. Each offers what Krauss would call a marked site, but the potential of multiplicity is also key to their poetics of contingency. In fact, site specificity can be seen as a strategic response to reproduction. It tells us that any object is embedded within a larger framework, and that reproduction catches only a tiny part of that context. A century ago, Duchamp's ready-mades made it clear that the experience of art is a product of the attention we bring to it. Rauschenberg took the argument a step further when he said there is no reason not to consider the world as one gigantic painting. The problem is that our brains cannot pay art quality attention to everything at the same time. Neurologically, we're always performing attention triage. Events we think will be repeated demand less of an immediate investment. The rarer event, the one we perceive won't be repeated, the more valuable we find it. When we think of the art event and the artwork as identical, any object that exists in multiple is at a disadvantage. We can encounter it and re-encounter it, and we have no reason to expend particular attention at this moment in time. But when we define art experience in terms of the relationship between the object and its setting in time and space, then everything becomes a unique work of art. A Felix Gonzalez Torres stack piece is simultaneously a unique sculpture and a limitless set of multiples, each spawning its own installation. The one thing it is not is a painting. Multiplicity turns out to be a far richer property than painting can make use of. Just to give a couple of examples at two ends of a spectrum, this is a Richard Tuttle project done for the January issue of Art and Print this year, which is effectively an optional artwork. If you leave it bound in the journal, it's a reproduction of a drawing like anything else. But if you follow the artist's instructions and cut it out, which is incredibly difficult to do, and install it in the place of your choosing, it becomes a singular work of art in a singular situation. So it isn't a work of art pretending to be a reproduction. It isn't a reproduction pretending to be a work of art. It fully occupies both positions. In its own small way, Tuttle's work recaptures the borders between the free-roaming reproduction and site-specific original. The facsimile of Paolo Veronese's Wedding at Cana, made by the digital fabrication firm Factum Arte, does this at a much, much larger scale. Full-size, ultra-high resolution copy is installed in Palladio's refectory in San Giorgio Maggiore, which is where it was originally made for. And after it was looted by Napoleon and taken to the Louvre and installed in the Louvre, it went up about, I think, 5 years ago at San Giorgio Maggiore. And so viewers today have a choice. You can go to Paris and see the actual molecules that Veronese painted in an object that is hung at the wrong height, in the wrong light, in the wrong building, with tourists backing into it because the Mona Lisa is on the other side of the room. Or you can go to Venice, which has no 16th century molecules in the painting, but is visually indistinguishable from the original and is hung in the exact space for which the artist had designed it. At the entrance to the refectory in Venice, there is a little display that details the history of the original and shows photographs of the scanning and fabrication installation of the facsimile. So before dropping into the glory of the room in its setting, the viewer has been prepared to think about the experience in terms of uniqueness and reproducibility and site and non-site. So it's an open question whether the piece in Venice operates as a reproduction or operates as a work of art. With all this in mind, I might propose another set of oppositions to accompany uniqueness and reproducibility: object and time. This new expanded field could accommodate González-Torres stack pieces, repeatable time-based works like film and video, installation projects that are neither coherent objects nor moving time, the recent proliferation of steamroller printing, events, screen print parties, mobile print stations, and shopfront studios that have lately transformed printmaking into a kind of performative theater of labor. By now, I have built Krauss's tidy little diagram into a kind of tottery expanded skyscraper in which print is everywhere and nowhere. One could argue that printmaking, now as ever, is a kind of traveling salesman making the rounds of everybody else's expanded field. Or we could say that print actually owns the ground on which all these expanded fields lie. The logic and mechanisms of print now pervade virtually every mode of contemporary art practice. Technical and material mastery is routinely outsourced. Artist-instigated models are executed through the skills of a range of fabricators and the intervention of mechanical devices. The intercession of templates, mediation, and repetition is so pervasive that we don't even notice it anymore. But if I were to choose a pair of terms felt to be in opposition, to define specifically the expanded field of printmaking, it wouldn't be any of these. It would be context and fragment. These mark the duality at the heart of replication, both conceptually and logistically. They are also at the heart of our struggles with time, with space, with memory, and with meaning. So I could draw a diagram, and I would show how sculpture and painting and film are all conceptually and materially beholden on the print. It would be tidy and satisfying and possibly even convincing, but it wouldn't necessarily be true. The fundamental problem, it seems to me, with the expanded field as an idea is that it was laid out by a surveyor and not by a farmer. Surveyors scan acreage from a distance and as a kind of abstraction. Farmers may do that, but they also have to deal with dirt. And I don't think most artists operate, as Krauss writes, in a rigorously logical progression. I think they navigate between concept, intuition, circumstance, and the demands of the physical world. Jared Diamond argued that throughout human history, invention has been the mother of necessity, not the other way round. Art comes about because people are by nature tinkerers, and we look at what we've made with an analytical eye, and sometimes we find meaning that leads us forward to the next bit of tinkering. For artists, this tinkering is often, not always, but often, rooted in materials and processes: copper, paper, wood. Ernst Gombrich's famous formulation about the origins of representation was that making comes before matching. The postmodern update might be making comes before meaning. Even Saul LeWitt, who famously wrote that execution is a perfunctory affair, didn't actually believe it. The statement was a rhetorical slap at modernism, as anyone who's ever looked closely at a LeWitt etching knows. As observers, we can set fence posts wherever we like, but we should recognize that seeds are always going to blow past them, and they're going to take root in unexpected places. In the end, it's always up to the artists to figure out whether they're worth cultivating or not. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan Tolman, for your very clear and very interesting lecture. I'm looking forward to talking about that afterwards. The next lecturer is Jen Law. She's an artist as well as an anthropologist writing on contemporary art. Now that's interesting. She is chair of programming and exhibitions of the Open Studio Contemporary Printing Center in Toronto. So her lecture will focus especially on transference, printmaking strategies in making art. So we're looking forward to hear what you have to say, Jen. Thank you. Give her a warm applause.
Good introduction. Thank you, Holger, and thank you as well to Jan and his colleagues for inviting me to take part in this wonderful symposium. I feel very privileged to be part of, to be in such good company. As an anthropologist, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a story, or a myth even. In 1956, American science fiction writer Philip K. Dick wrote a dystopic short story entitled Pay for the Printer, imagining a post-apocalyptic world that has become entirely reliant on printed copies of things. In this future society, industry has been destroyed by war, and humanity has become dependent on an alien species of organic printers called biltong, who've come to mankind's aid to help restore the material world. The biltong are capable of copying, or in the language of the story, printing, any object, building, cultural artifact, or material creation. But over generations, the original authentic material referents have become degraded or mislaid, and the traditional knowledge of making lost. As the story begins, the printers are dying, and their replicated world, increasingly fabricated from copies of copies, is on the verge of disintegration. Dick's story ends with his protagonists fleeing their crumbling, copied communities to begin a new colony on the margins. Estranged from tradition and the knowledge and methods of making, mankind is forced to reinvent the world virtually from scratch. In the final paragraphs, one of the exiles pulls out a crudely fashioned cup that he has carved out of wood, holding it for comparison against one of the few surviving original objects from an almost forgotten era, a piece of Steuben glassware. He explains that the wooden cup is closer to the Steuben glassware than any print, for, quote, printing is merely copying, not building. The steps bridging the making of the two cups, let alone the manufacturing of more complex objects, will take generations to fill in, but it is implied that the future of humanity is dependent on such an evolutionary reboot. Dick's story is intended as a cautionary tale, the moral purpose of which is to forewarn the potential loss of traditional material knowledge through an overdependence on technology. Technology has always inspired the utopian imagination while simultaneously inciting social unease. And speculative angst is not new to print culture, which continues to be preoccupied with questions of the future. The topic permeates print conferences, panels, and publications, and likewise in the world of commercial printing, as we've discussed in previous panels, volumes has been written about the crisis in publishing and the uncertain future of the printed book. I'm particularly intrigued by the printerly focus on edges, boundaries, expanding fields, and uncertain futures, recognizing, of course, that there are all sorts of reasons for such future fixation. As both an artist and an anthropologist, I relate well to the idea of an expanded or expanding field. For in anthropology, the field is the place where research happens, where questions are asked, and where knowledge is acquired in a participatory fashion. In this regard, let me acknowledge from the start that I'm interested in contemporary print in its broadest definition, not simply as it manifests within the contemporary art world, but as a graphic culture or set of cultures with historically evolving ideologies, traditions, social customs, knowledge systems, and technologies. It is the theme of knowledge, its transmission, and its evolution in relation to technology that serves as the basis for this paper. In this, I've been influenced by theories of technogenesis, or the idea that humans and technics co-evolve together, as outlined, for example, by philosopher Bernard Stiegler, or more recently revisited by media theorist Catherine Hales. Technogenesis collapses the subject-object divide between humanity and technology, arguing that objects like humans have their own ontological embodiments. From this perspective, we can examine the ways in which print-based knowledge may synergistically combine with evolving technologies to produce and catalyze new kinds of knowledge. Grounded in mimesis and multiplicity, print as a technocultural system has of course long been a critical media for producing and disseminating information, questioning ideology, and inspiring social activism and change. Indeed, the very history and language of print is one of both evolution and revolution. All evolution, technological or otherwise, involves strategies of problem solving, characterized by adaptation, inheritance, information transfer, trial and error, and acceptation. That is, the co-option or conversion of an innovative discovery which may have been originally developed for another purpose entirely, the classic example of which is Gutenberg's printing press, a screw-driven wine press turned into an engine of mass communication. Often, it is the ways in which existing knowledge systems and technologies are combined that is innovative. Along these lines, this paper builds upon my previous writing on the practice of transference in relation to graphic knowledge and the ways in which artists employ print-based pedagogies to think about making art. Here, contemporary print-based practice is understood not simply as an assortment of technological skills to be acquired and employed, but rather as a set of unique aesthetic and conceptual problem-solving strategies that may be transferred and applied across diverse media. Indeed, the future of print may not rely as much on the evolution of the machine, the press, the printer, the associated materials, as in the ways in which we think about and with print. Toronto-based collaborative artists Matt Donovan and Hallie Siegel take a long view of the evolution of information technology in their multimedia practice. They refer to their sculptures as history machines, referencing the machinations of history and the hegemonic meta-narratives that continue to inform contemporary social practice and in which print-based culture is deeply implicated. Since the turn of the millennium, Donovan and Siegel have produced a series of objects indexing the tensions inherent to radical shifts in information technologies caught in moments of transition. This liminal angst is made manifest in impressions consisting of two interlocking magnesium plates, each cast with a section of dialogue from Plato's Phaedrus, in which Socrates debates with Phaedrus the merits and pitfalls of oral speech writing versus the written word. Each plate is a stamping mold of the other, bearing both sides of the debate in two running columns, alternately embossed and debossed so that they fit together perfectly. It is a monument to the written word and perhaps to the triumph of print. Yet, as Donovan and Siegel explain, the work likewise memorializes the loss that inevitably accompanies technological innovation and advancement. Where impressions marks a shift from oral to print, self-printing book prophesizes the dawning of the digital age. Cast in brass, this book is a sculptural edition of Vannevar Bush's 1945 essay, As We May Think. This post-war text was a call to scientists to take stock of the past and turn their future attentions to the massive task of developing networks of communication and information exchange in order to make scientific research more widely accessible. As we May Think is commonly cited as one of the earliest projective descriptions of computers, scanning devices, fax machines, hypertext, and the internet. In self-printing book, each left-hand page is a printing mold of its right-hand readable counterpart. So when the pages are turned, the book appears to print itself. Undermined by the same technology imagined within its pages, this is a book that heralds both the end and the continuation of the print era, simultaneously enacting its own demise and rebirth with each reading. The duo repeatedly create objects which appear to take over their own production and editioning. In the same vein, Donovan and Siegel produced an exquisitely carved ebony wood high cube. each individual component of which is carved with haiku-inspired syllabic fragments, ultimately composing 6 original commissioned poems by poet Gregory Betts. Modeled on a Rubik's Cube, each turn of the cube results in a new 3-line poem. A twist on Japanese woodblock printing and traditional poetry, the haiku is capable of manufacturing a seamlessly endless number of varied editions produced from a singular, multi-faced matrix. Donovan and Siegel are interested in the process of editioning as it relates to mechanical reproduction and manufacturing strategies, playing out the object-focused tensions between the singular versus the multiple, the original versus the copy. Balanced on the edge of tradition and innovation, these objects seem capable of perpetual reinvention. For Toronto-based artist Barbara Balfour, evolution of both technology and the individual, however seemingly purposeful, is always underwritten by chance. Trained as a printmaker and immersed in text-based practice, Balfour appreciates the unexpected diversions, digressions, and failures of knowledge, process, and intention that are part and parcel of the creative process. In exploring such themes, she regularly employs strategies of repetition as a means of upending meaning. For Balfour, mimesis is the guiding principle underlying our narrative constructions of self. Since 2010, Balfour has been producing multiple series of text-based lithographs exploring written expressions of time, seriality, and recurrence. In each of the series, short phrases referencing repetition and/or continuity are handwritten repetitively without punctuation and seemingly ad infinitum. In works such as On and Over, the monotony of repetition becomes a subject in its own right. Their meaning, in part, depends on how one interprets and times the intervals in between. Intervals take on an even greater significance in the related work, Living and Dying, in which the word living is repeated until mid-page, where it is then taken over by the repetition of the word dying. As with other series, each individual print is unique. The matrix shifted slightly with each printing, and the colors varied, resulting in diverse articulations of the same text. Significantly, the point at which living becomes dying is almost imperceptible. It is a shorthand index of individual evolution. Balfour's interest in diversions and failures as potential opportunities for reinvention is taken up in the work Persistence, a life mask of the artist cast from glow-in-the-dark silly putty. Balfour has employed silly putty on more than one occasion for its printerly ability to transfer newspaper images or text to another surface. In this instance, she's interested in the silicone material for its molding properties. Cast from life, the sculptural imprint represents a life paused but not yet complete, an evolution still in progress. While original silly putty is a pale, fleshy color, the phosphorescent greenish tint of this version lends the mold an otherworldly, ethereal glow, representing perhaps the ghostly spectrality of a self that exists between life and death. Persistence may also be read as a reference to the tenacity required for technological innovation to occur, a nod to the specific ontological history of a material that evolved over many incarnations. Silly putty was originally created in 1943 during research into potential synthetic rubber substitutes for use by the United States in World War II. As the silicone-based polymer didn't possess all the qualities of rubber, it failed as a viable replacement. After several unsuccessful attempts at repurposing it scientifically, it was eventually marketed as a highly successful toy with some help from a very persistent marketing consultant. Innovation is dependent on the ability to recognize opportunity and failure. For the artist, a seemingly dead end can be a vantage point from which to shift perspective. Dead ends and close readings likewise preoccupy South African artist and writer Catherine Smith. Trained in print media, Smith recently received an MSc in forensic art at the University of Dundee in Scotland and is about to embark on a PhD in forensic art at the Liverpool School of Art and Design in the UK. Her work explores the relationship between art and criminal investigation, a rather appropriate field of inquiry in contemporary South Africa. She's been interested in forensic methods of observation for many years, employing a close microscopic examination of printed materials, which aims to engage the viewer as a kind of detective, deconstructing and unraveling clues and references they may not announce themselves outright. In 2012, Smith created a body of work called Incident Room, Jacoba Bubbles Schroeder, 1949 to 2012, based on a cold case from Johannesburg involving the unsolved murder of a young Afrikaans working-class white girl in 1949. Schroeder was strangled and her neatly dressed body laid out in partially burned veld in a developing suburb of Johannesburg. 2 men known to Schroeder were arrested 2 months after her death, but there was insufficient forensic evidence to convict them. Media reports at the time cast aspersions on the victim's moral character, referring to her as a good-time girl addicted to liquor. The case has captured popular imagination and has been revisited and revised by journalists and true crime authors for over 6 decades. Incident Room represents an ongoing investigative project, lending an artistic eye to a failed forensic process. As Smith explains, the title Incident Room makes reference to the physical space, usually in a law enforcement agency, in which all known information about an investigation, visual and otherwise, is collated. Such a space is by nature a generative and dialogical one. Briefings are given, connections are made, leads are followed. Installed in public spaces, Incident Room ultimately functions as an interactive, dynamic collection of living documents wherein print is both evidential and the analytical process by which a problem is collaboratively confronted, scrutinized, and hopefully resolved. Smith's investigation has methodologically, aesthetically, and conceptually proceeded through print. Her collation of graphic evidence has often required creative and sometimes subversive strategies of research and collection, at times compelling her to covertly photograph or copy restricted access materials in order to reinsert them into the public domain. Smith's persistent efforts have resulted in some progress with the case, including the rediscovery of a long-missing police case file and Schroeder's unmarked grave, imaged using ground-penetrating radar. In the course of her practice-based research, Smith has embraced a variety of high and low duplication technologies and mimetic strategies, including hand-produced carbon copies, photocopies, microfiche films, photographs, and digital scans and imaging. Copies are often made of copies. Through this multi-layered process, Smith has attempted to unravel the popular myth of Bubbles in order to reinscribe her subjectivity, dignity, and memory. In the artist's work, as in life, the facts do not necessarily lead to truth or resolution, but hope persists, and as forensic technologies evolve, new opportunities for advancing the investigation continue to present themselves. As with the other artists I've discussed, my personal material practice is likewise rooted in print both methodologically and conceptually. I work with what I term the artifacts of print culture, of reading and writing specifically. In the face of contemporary debate surrounding the purported crisis in print, I contemplate the future of the book, our fetishization and attachment to its physical object form, and our desire to collect and possess the knowledge contained therein. I've generally tended to work in an analog way, producing hand-cut screen prints and lithographs, as well as sculptural bookwork. However, I recently have turned my attention to the question of technology more overtly, exploring new strategies of making and thinking about the future of print. In 2014, I created 2 related objects, a book and a printing press, using 3D printing technology. Artifact is a replica of a volume by Edmund C. Berkeley, an American computer scientist who wrote one of the earliest popular publications on computers in 1949, called Giant Brains, or Machines That Think. The book is open to chapter 11, in which Berkeley imagines what the social impact of computers will mean for mankind. While Artifact appears to be a real book, It is rather a carefully constructed illusion. The top pages are printed on the surface but do not turn. The book is open but cannot close. Although technically printed, it is in fact unreadable. It exists solely as an art object, an artifact of sorts. As a book, it is redundant. Reinventing the Wheel is a 3D printed miniature, fully functioning printing press designed from blueprints for a full-size intaglio press. Here I've employed a contemporary printing technology to reproduce a traditional printing technology. The work is in effect a print that prints prints. It's capable of printing an infinite variety of plates. This particular plate is written in binary code, which in this case translates as print rules. As a self-perpetuating object, the 3D printed press references an evolution in print culture that does not signal extinction, but rather perpetuation. Working in 3D printing has often entailed trial and error, allowing for designs and objects to evolve over time. I'm intrigued by both the hype and the hope pinned on 3D printing technology to transform the way we design and manufacture things, everything from food to architecture to living organs printed from living tissues. Some analysts have even likened the rapid evolution of additive manufacturing to a new industrial revolution. 3D printing has joined other evolving technologies in expanding our ideas of what materials can be. These days, materials are increasingly smarter, and inks may be sentient. But like all technologies, 3D printing has its limitations and its shortcomings, and it is often in the combination of old and new technologies that the most interesting shifts in thinking occur. At the time of writing, I've been working on a new body of 3D printed work for an upcoming solo exhibition entitled Means and Ends, which will open in October this year. I don't have finished images of this work, but I will show you some of the images of the work in progress. Pharmacy is a collection of 3D printed ink bottles filled with ink I've made from book ash. Historically, some of the earliest ink was made from mixing fine soot or lampblack, carbon ash, and bone char with hide glue and water. In pharmacy, each bottle contains ink made from a specific book, thus far totaling 100 volumes. It is both a library of sorts and an apothecary, composed of distilled ideas and philosophies, which in the form of ink anticipate new narratives written from those that have come before. While book ash may conjure images of the destructive impulse of censorship, as ink, it ultimately proclaims the futility of such violent attempts at erasure. Pharmacy is a work about influence, inspiration, and the creative process. It speaks to regeneration and the perseverance of knowledge and meaning beyond the printed text. I've also been working on a 3D printed pocket watch entitled Timepiece. The technological evolution of timekeeping devices arguably rivals that of print technologies in its profound impact on human culture and the ways in which people think and behave. In the 3D printing world, the race is on to create the first fully printed mechanical watch. The primary stumbling block is precision, which is not a new problem in the history of horology. Standard 3D printers are generally only capable of a resolution of 0.1 millimeters, which is not nearly fine enough to print the smallest mechanisms accurately. Carl Bashand, an American university engineering student, recently employed a more advanced multi-jet modeling, or MJM, process, which is capable of 0.01 millimeter resolution, to print a functioning replica of a high-end futuristic-looking Swiss Uruk watch. However, MJM processes cannot yet compete with the fine machining capable with CNC processes, which are used by watch manufacturers. Here I've chosen to replicate a pocket watch, for the invention of portable watches not only attests to the rapid advancement of horology, particularly from the 16th century onwards, but the increasing shift from public to private time. Pocket watches were luxury items until the middle of the 19th century, when the innovation of machine tools and interchangeable parts led to their mass manufacture and the ultimate democratization of time. Since then, watch technologies have continued to evolve and become ever more covetable and complex. Witness the hype over the iWatch, for example. Timepiece is modeled on a Victorian-era pocket watch, the design of which has been repeatedly copied and widely manufactured in recent years. This 3D printed version positions itself as both a mass-produced knockoff and a unique artwork. As a technological object, it is, in the words of Timothy Barker, quote, an aggregate of solutions, concepts, or problems originating from different historical eras. It bears within it all the past successes of horological evolution. Yet nevertheless, as a 3D printed watch, it remains in many ways a failure for now. So to return to the end, to Dick's story, one of the characters pulls a small printed watch out of her pocket. The strap disintegrates, and while the watch face still appears intact, the hands no longer move. A print made from a print, the watch is an image of technology paused in its evolutionary tracks. Dick's depiction of print is that of a faithful or blind copy, marking a fidelity so true to an original that it has suffocated progress. It lacks the imagination and ingenuity we have come to expect from the world at large. In his version of the future, the problem is not with industry and technology per se, but rather with humanity's failure to push forward technology's evolution, thus halting its own in the process. Technology represents an opportunity for becoming. It must be understood not simply as a set of innovative tools at our disposal, but the means by which we continuously reinvent ourselves. The good news is that stories of the future are constantly in the process of being rewritten. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jen Lo. This was very interesting, and I was especially your own works there. They fitted nicely in for the discussion afterwards, I think. Now, our third lecturer, Miller Lago from Bogota in Colombia. He is mainly working with art projects around the world, where he's confronting art and environmental issues. And he has done some really spectacular projects, and we're going to see one of them now, called A Silent Witness. Please welcome Miller Lagos.
How can I stop? Thank you, Holger. First of all, I would like to thank Jan and the Oslo National Academy of Art for this invitation. It made me believe in art. And since I was invited, I started thinking, how can I contribute to the issues of this seminar? Most of my work is about sculpture, but some of them are referred to print. So I went to one of my best friends, is an artist, Liliana Sanchez, and we prepared these some words for you, and also we prepared one video that for accompany my lecture. So I would like to thank in advance for your patience. Okay, so. A silent witness. My work as an artist has focused primarily on sculpture, but it could not be defined only by it. I consider that my work also transits in synchrony with other media such as drawing, cinema, video, and it is constantly nourished by images and encounters that come from everyday experience. Increasingly,
The role of the contemporary artist is to find and strike up more and more dialogues between disciplines and to constantly expand, so its action can reverberate tangibly in the world. The artist observes and recognizes the dynamics of their surrounding environments. That is why I have chosen a series of stories and meaningful findings that have outlined my work as an artist. And through them, I aim to address the subject of the passing of time and history from different perspectives. First, I would like to tell you a story. It is a myth called Wone, in which the Colombian ethnic group Ticuna explained the creation of the Amazon River. Wone was a huge tree that covered the jungle so much that light could not penetrate its thick foliage, keeping the jungle in total darkness. One day, in the search for more light, the Ticuna people and the animals of the jungle worked together to shut down the tree. When the rabbit took the last bite, the enormous tree did not fall as expected. Instead, it literally floated in the air. Not understanding what was happening, they sent a squirrel to take a look from the top of the tree. The squirrel found a sloth. Do you know what a sloth is? This is a sloth animal that lives in the trees. So I want to make sure. This sloth was hugging the tree with its legs and grasping a bright star in the sky with its arms. The squirrel tried to persuade the sloth to let go of the tree because they need the light to brighten their lives. But the sloth firmly refused. The squirrel went down to tell the others and came back with the ants, who tickled the sloth until it could not resist anymore and released the tree. The fall took several moons, and its impact was felt throughout the earth. Its weight fractured the mountains, the Andes mountain range, and left a deep empty channel from which water started flowing. The big trunk became the Amazon River. The three branches became the tributaries, and the foliage is lakes and ponds. Forevermore, the Amazon River will be known as the Great Tree of Water, or Wone. The desire to come face to face with the ancient trees took me to the Amazon, where I encountered one of the species that is very important for the indigenous communities of Central and South America, the ceiba. With the assistance of a guide and an indigenous shaman from the Ticuna community, we spent several weeks going deep into the Colombian jungle. The closer we got to the ceibas, we had to stop and wait for the shaman to ask the trees for permission to continue and to access to the knowledge within it. At the end of the day, we arrived. There were tall and immense trees that you could hardly take in one go. We stayed there for a long time. The myth of Wone and the encounter with the ceibas offered two different perspectives on the complex relationships that exist in nature between living beings and time. Wone presents a nature that continuously integrates itself with its own environment, where the vertical growth of the trees is assimilated into the vital flow of the river, a subtle similarity that is lost in the Western idea of balance and progress. I began to wonder about the evidence of the passing of time through the trees, which from the privilege of their apparent stillness can record changes in their environment, in each of their rings. There is a longevity that surpasses that of humans, and to think of it is to recognize the multiplicity of events that we do not witness and all the changes that we do not see. Throughout my artistic practice, I have worked with different materials, such as concrete, plastic, tar, and paper. A material that frequently reappears in my work is paper, which, through its many transformations, reveals the physical and symbolic connection between the largest stocks of printed material circulating in the world and the trees, their original source. While walking in the jungle, I saw in the trees a living archive, and at the same time, I saw it transform into paper, carrying images, archiving knowledge, and all kinds of information that confirms our human existence. The constant change of materials for the purposes of use or function in culture question the agency of matter and its existence in the world. Another meaningful experience happened while looking at Leonardo da Vinci's book that included scans of some sketches and original manuscripts. While turning the book pages, I observed the difference between the white perfection of the paper I was holding in my hand and those antique sketches which in pale colors and a wrinkled surface show the material condition of a paper aged by centuries. Then I realized now the action of time works against the notion of permanence. First, it is a trigger for human efforts to preserve the culture. And secondly, it is a force that acts in opposition to the fragility of every material. I also realized that just one sheet of paper was the material evidence of the existence of the Leonardo da Vinci's sketch. Around this simple fact, I imagined how it would look in terms of its volume, size, and scale, to put together all the reproduction of the same sketch that had been printed to date. So, what took me on an exploration of paper and form was the strong correlation between a single image, its meaning, and the object as a container of time and memory. Trying to push the limits of both image and object, I moved into actions and printed 1,000 sheets of a single image. So I piled them up and started removing the edges with an angle grinder. To my surprise, during this process, an intense smoky wood smell came from the paper. Its surface looked burned, just like the bark of the tree. A lucky accident revealed the nature condition of the paper, the one of being a tree. While exploring our perception of time, the ephemeral and the transcendent, I made a video in which I walk around and climb one of the ceiba trees. With this simple action, I want to show the monumentality and grandeur of these ancient Amazonian trees. In contrast to my physical present, human time is different. For us, longevity is related to the sensation and permanence of a place. From the human perspective, there is a longing to transcend time, to reach where our own nature does not allow, and maybe it is this feeling that makes us to leave traces for future generations, intensifying the desire for permanence. But for the tree, there is nothing that intensifies the desire for continuity and eternity. For the tree, time simply passes, and the tree simply endures. In my sculptural process, the object is pushed into constant transformation to reach different scales and to be shown in a new reality. In many cases, the constructive limits of the object are challenged to achieve certain monumentality. Its surface is altered to change its appearance to some degree, sublimating its meaning and accumulating layers of material that could grow indefinitely. In each of these three-dimensional actions, one can see the intention to transform and present the object anew, to remake it, reconstruct its time and reconfigure its meaning. Robert Smithson presents a candy concept to test entropy. He asks us to imagine a box containing black and white sand, first rotating clockwise and then rotating in the other direction. The result of this is a mixture that is increasingly gray and increasingly entropic. When filming the experiment, he warns us that sooner or later, the film itself will crumble and deteriorate and enter to the state of irreversibility. This concept of entropy is a returning theme in my work, which is explained by Smithson as the impossibility to returning to the origin. In this sense, the logs I made with pilot printed paper can trigger this back and forth dynamic. Between the object, there is a representation of a tree, but at the same time, is represented as the tree itself. Recently, I built 4 paper trees. Each one of them of nearly 5 meters tall. I took 4 tons of newspaper and 700 volunteers during 5 months. In the middle of this titanic enterprise, I witnessed the complexity, or rather, the impossibility to returning from the paper to tree. In this sense, the original and the copy lives in parallel, in a mutual invocation, in a state of irreversibility, in which poetically each can only evoke its counterpart. I had made a journey through trees that turn in mighty rivers and papers that turn into trees. The relevance of this image lies in the way they can expand and reconfigure the 2 elements that fundamentally constitute existence, time and history. In the fall of one, the Great Saga, the idea of the 2-dimensional seems blurred, but the dramatic transformation of the landscape reminds us that every surface, be at the ground level or a piece of paper, is modified over the course of the time. Perhaps the feeling is one of an apparent lightness, but all actions are evidence of the passing of time. We record, we register our present, and we leave a mark on paper or by walking through the woods. No matter the size, we live in a world where lines are converted in trenches, cracks into canyons, natural reliefs into colossal engravings, and limits are more like inconclusive geographies, entropic and irreversible. This is a time lapse of the last project that I was working at the National University Museum in Bogota. It was a commission from this museum. We were working with people from the Amazonian, and those are the roots of some trees that lives in this area. We use a newspaper for build the roots, but it was more thinking in the information that this paper was carrying. So each tree is like a big container of information. So I tried to do very fast the process, but it's taking time. This is another piece that I made last year in the Santa Fe Biennial in New Mexico. It took 4 tons of newspaper from Santa Fe. And it was the same. It was the idea to represent one of the ceibas trees, but more small. And all the paper are free. It's just stack, and later we carve. But all with the paper is unglued. It's just one over the other. And I would like to show you this image that I found in one book from a German explorer, Carbon Martius, who came to the Amazon in the 1832. And when he saw the ceibas tree, he was impressioned. So he made this illustration about the ceibas trees. But the name that he put in the illustration got my attention, because he said the trees that born before Christ near to the Amazon River. So it made me think about the time and how he knows how old was those trees. So this is my lecture for all of you. Thank you.
Well, well, thank you, all of you, for this interesting part of our seminar. Now, first to you, Miller, have you ever made a print?
Yeah, I made a few prints, but when I was a student, I took all the classes about printmaking. So it is something that is important for me. I pay a lot of attention to prints and the history of prints. So the first 3 trunks that I make, after I found this situation between the reproduction of Leonardo da Vinci's sketches in one book of Taschen, I was thinking it was a sketch. It wasn't a print, but an engraving. But I started looking for another artist who used wood as a matrix, and also the paper as a material to print. So I was thinking in Albrecht Dürer. So I selected the Apocalyptic series. I found this series very interesting. So I took the image from the books, and I make reproduction in offset, in an industrial system. So the first 3 trunks that I started to carve were with this series of Albrecht Dürer. Later I found, when I started carving these 3 trunks, I got involved in a kind of ideological situation, because they were religious images.
Okay.
So people came and see the 3 trunks and start asking, why Christ? Why this? And I say, what's the problem? It's just images. But it was because the power of the images was related to religious things. So I started moving to another kind of representation. And I found Ottawa Hiroshige woodcuts that are colorful, and also he leaves many elements of the matrix. There is wood. So
would it be possible to say, I mean, the way you look at it, the way you were thinking as a contemporary artist, can you use techniques, ideas from the print world, what you've experienced in any way in these projects?
Are you referred to if I use a technique for printmaking?
Well, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of tradition. You've mentioned several already.
Yeah, in my case, it's related to the printmaking techniques, but I use digital process. I scan and send files. So sometimes I feel the need to do seal screens or woodcuts or linoleums, but I love all those kind of things. But later is another situation more, I don't know, more massive.
Okay.
So I need other kind of.
Maybe we should ask that question to your co-lecturers. Did you find something, relevant from what you were talking about in the way he's working, especially in the last two projects you had in the University of Bogota and Santa Fe? Well, I don't know, and some of the others as well. What did you think? Were they relevant for your texts, for the way you're thinking here?
Maybe from Jem.
Yeah, okay.
She opened my mind about the possibilities to use another technologies, like 3D printers. As a, I don't know, I always asking myself about if there a kind of way to think in two-dimensional way or three-dimensional way.
Okay.
So why there are artists who prefer make bidimensional things, or why there are artists who used to work in three-dimensional situations. So the process that I did is because I want to see the material used to build our culture or to keep our information. So I need to see volumes. So when I saw the Jens process with the 3D printers, I am thinking how the future is.
Okay. Well, that's the nightmare of the museums collecting prints, But we won't touch that. I just want to ask, Jen, did you find something relevant from what you were talking about with his way of working or thinking?
Yes, I think that, I was very excited to find out that I was on a panel with Milor, because I think his work is extraordinary, and I think it speaks to print in a wonderful way, in terms of your use of paper, your use of printed materials, and how that work transitions from nature to culture to nature. I think, I don't know, Susan, if you wanted to, but I think it's incredible work, and wonderful that it's part of a discussion about print, because I think it's very much rooted in print culture and information technologies and knowledge transmission.
Well, I think what's so lovely about it is its articulation of how everything we do is moving in and out of print culture. I mean, there's nothing we do that doesn't engage with print culture. And when we talk about people working with print, we can talk about people carving wood blocks or, printing lithostones or whatever, but we're also talking about people using the printed matter that's out there. And I think it's so often a loop that goes in. But, of course, nobody takes it, or very rarely do you see it taken back to the level of the paper that goes into it. And that idea of, there's the one trajectory, which is the tree gets chopped down, the tree gets ground up, the tree gets turned into crappy paper, and there's crappy information printed on it, and it's advertising, and so far this is just a tragedy, right? That the tree was beautiful and the advertising isn't. So to then, flip it back around and build back up a tree that is full of this information, because while the information for us who live in this world, the advertising is not interesting. You think about how, all right, historian geek here, how excited you get about finding stupid bits of information that are 200 years old, 300 years old, printing manuals from the 16th century, things like this that people get really excited about. So there is that sense in which, one can decide for oneself what information is interesting or not interesting, but it's all out there and it's all in the tree. And just that notion of and you had some great phrase about how every action is marking a passage of time or something like that. And I think that really beautifully puts that into physical form.
I think maybe some of the students would like to ask you some questions. Miller, let's have, is there anybody who would like to, and if you are shy about questioning in English, please do so in Norwegian and I will try to translate.
Or in Spanish.
Or in Spanish, yes. Very good. Somebody wants to ask about the projects here? Otherwise, we go to the more theoretical parts of the...
That's a threat.
Yeah. That was a threat, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, then we continue that. Well, thank you so far. I was wondering about, you know, the expanded field. And I love your way of treating, you know, Rosalind's text, really. Thank you for that one. I was thinking about, in this enormous, ever-expanding field, you know, the works of prints, you know, where do they sort of, and the printer, where does he have the artist working with print, where does he have, or she have the upper hand? Where does their practice, their knowledge, their insight, etc., where does it really, where can it be used? To your knowledge, it's your opinion. We'll hear about the other people as well, but this is, I think, very central to the theme of the seminar, which is both, you know, print as a physical tradition and as a, you know, a theoretical thing, text and print. You know, you have both sides now. So where in this situation does the artist working from this point of view have the upper hand?
I think it depends on what you mean by the upper hand. If you're talking about, say, clout in the marketplace,
no.
It doesn't, and that's never going to happen. If you're talking about the upper hand in terms of, I guess, being the most apt or articulate way to go after certain kinds of issues, to make certain kinds of work, there's no question. I mean, you guys have the Munch Museum, you've got the paintings, and you've got the prints. And there are a lot of historians who, and not just print historians, who will say the paintings are better than the prints. And certainly, people are very, very aware of the prints. So you've had artists throughout history who have done multiple things, or you know, that is what we know. The bunny and the Albertina, okay, there are some drawings, but mainly what we know are the prints. So I think it's always been the case, but I think part of it has to do with multiplicity and the fact that you don't fixate the way you do on unique works when you know they're multiple, and that translates into what gets reproduced in, say, art history texts and what people choose to talk about. I think, speaking of Rosalind Krauss, one of the things that's so fascinating to me is that you have a generation of critics and theoreticians, historians, who are very concerned with undermining the notion of the artwork as capitalist commodity. They're very interested in artworks that theoretically mess this up in some way, conceptual work, so on and so forth. And all they write about is painting, sculpture, installations, things that are unique. They don't write about multiples. They don't write about things that actually enter the marketplace in accessible ways. The whole notion that the multiples movement was about public art, in some way it's about ownership. It's because we relate to things we own differently. And that idea of spreading ownership, of spreading multiple kinds of control, multiple kinds of relationships with art objects, I think those are situations in which printed work or anything that's editioned can articulate very different kinds of relationships with its audience. There's an organization in New York called Personal Desire Propaganda, and they do editions of 100. Everything sells for $10. And they just do these shows, and they just have the thing stacked on the floor, and everybody can come and buy one, and then they roll it into a tube, and you go out the door, and it's all cash sales. And the reason they don't make any money, and the reason that they make you pay for it is because it changes the relationship. People take things for free, it usually gets chucked in the bin kind of when you get in the door. That this is a trade-off. It's what the market does. I give you something, you give me, I'm making some kind of commitment here. So I think there's a lot of marketplace issues that are interesting in terms of prints. But I also think there's a lot of really interesting work being done in print that is site-specific and that isn't multiplied. And I think, Thomas Kilper's presentation earlier today, or there are a number of artists who work in these very site-specific ways that, because it's doubled with the print, it really makes you think about that notion of what travels and what doesn't travel. So I think there are a lot of areas.
Okay.
So don't give up.
No, you're a little bit timid on the subject, though. But let's ask Jen. How about you then?
Well, I think of print. I'm not sure about upper hand. I think that comes down to the individual and how you make use of print as an opportunity. And in that regard, I would say that I see print as offering a set of aesthetic and material and conceptual strategies for making and thinking. And it's what you do with that. Like any media, it's what you do with that decides whether you have the upper hand or not. But I think that a training in print can be advantageous because I think it requires a considerable amount of discipline. You're dealing with very often very complex processes that combine science and art making and material making. And I think it teaches you very important lessons about timekeeping, for example, and patience and perseverance. And not to say that other media don't do that, but I think a particular kind of person is attracted to working in print. And I think, I'm interested in artists who think like printmakers even when they're not making prints. And
that was a little bit what I was talking about,
Yes, yes. And there are many people who do that. I think, I think the mistake is when we confine ourselves to a media as if that defines who we are as an artist. I think as an artist, you pick and choose the media that best help you express the idea you're interested in, putting out there or questioning or working through. And print is a way of working through something. Just like writing is a way of working through something, or sculpture is a way. I think, yes, I think it's an opportunity, really, print.
But this, the contemporary art scene with the, where the text and theory comes very heavily in. What does that do for the situation for the printmakers and the print in this scene? Well, it should be good, actually, because it's press, it's communication, there's a big tradition for it. And we've had some great examples in this seminar for how text is used and how communicating, especially at a local level, action is to kind of thinking.
I think print has a history of finding subversive ways of getting itself out there. I think, that is an advantage. I think within the contemporary art world, it's obviously very difficult. It can be a very difficult discipline, trying to place itself and be, against other media. Sometimes, not always. I think it's very exciting that a printmaker won the Turner Prize.
Yeah.
But I think these days there are many, you showed William Kentridge's work, for example. I mean, there is somebody who has a very high-profile career who works in print often, and he talks about print often. And there are many artists who work with print and are very successful at it. Again, it's what do you do with it that matters. But I think we could get in. I'm not very interested in the semantic debates about whether what Wade Guyton does is a painting or a print. I think that matters for the market, really. I think that is defining something in a certain way because it makes sense from the market's perspective to define it that way. I think Wade, as I like the way Susan put it in terms of when she's asked about Wade Guyton, that she responds he's a very good painter. I think that's how he defines himself. Whether I would look as a printmaker at his work and see it as a painting, maybe I would. I think, but the semantics of it doesn't interest me very much.
No, okay.
I think there's a self-definition thing that goes. So we periodically get asked at the journal, can I submit this? Is it a print? Do you, what are your rules? And it's like, we don't have any rules. You think it's a print, we think it's a print. The edges of any of this stuff are so sloppy. It really has to do with A, how the artist conceives of it, and B, how it behaves in the world.
Okay, well, you've heard a start of a discussion here, and you've heard the lecturers, what they've had to say. Would you like to ask them some questions? I mean, we have these beautiful people here now, in Oslo, even if it's raining like mad. We have a possibility of getting something out of them that you maybe would like to have an answer. So please, the floor is open here. Okay, could you... Say your name, please.
Hello, I'm Victoria Brown,
even if we know
Associate
you.
Professor. I'd just like to ask Susan if she could respond to... I found it really interesting, the connection you were describing between how prints have connected the viewer to the traditions of the painting, as it were, or the sculpture. And I wondered, therefore, now we're in a digital age, I often look at digital technology as perhaps the technology to be used for equipment, or how that can be used in addition to traditional printmaking techniques. But in the speech that you gave, I was really interested about perhaps how we would think about how digital technology is now connecting the viewer to the print, so that the print can be the end rather than the print connecting to the painting or the sculpture.
It's a really interesting question because, what we've got at the moment is just this total dematerialization that we don't have any notion, when I pull up an image on my phone, great, I've got an image on my phone. I've got no idea how big it is. I've got no idea what it feels like. I've got 10% of the information about it, right? And my suspicion is that there's always this timeline, right, with any new technology where, you always read the stories about the ancient Greeks, the bird so dumb it tries to eat the grapes that were painted because it's not hip to reproduction yet. And I think we're still at a stage, maybe at the edge of it, with digital images where we still buy into them. And people are starting to get suspicious of them. People are starting to prefer other things and to re-emphasize materiality. So I think that the digital image, well, actually, let me just ask you a question just to refine it. Are we talking about the digital image as something that you can transfer and get printed out into a physical object somewhere, or something that simply lives digitally?
I think it's extending the connection, as we're talking about it, extending the field. So you made the connection between the traditions of the print being used as a way of connecting us to the unique object of the painting or the sculpture, and therefore, in a couple of other lectures, there's been the comment about the difference between the reproducibility and the multiplicity,
Right.
which is again something that perhaps I, as a printmaker, hadn't defined so clearly previously, and that leads me back to the idea of the digital technology having that influence.
I think that's absolutely true, and I think just like you got stuff that died because it didn't look good in engraving, you get things that look good online or don't look good online, and you get people designing things to look good online because they know that's the way most people are going to see something. And then you get the flip, of course, which is people purposefully making prints, making paintings, making drawings that you can't see in reproduction. You know, sort of Odd Reinhardt round 2, which is also a kind of interesting way to play with if you want people to actually be in a place, you know, back to the specificity thing. But yeah, I don't think there's any question that digital stuff is how everything's.
Is that okay? Yeah? All right. Any more questions from people, nice people here?
I have the mic at least, so if I can ask a question too.
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Thank you. Well, for the internet, I'm Theodore Bart. I work here. I was wanting to kind of look at a certain class of objects of which Rosalind Krauss's schema might be an instance, going beyond looking at it as a schema and looking at it as an object, and a circulatable object. And we find various dialects of this. For instance, the semiotic square, Greimas square, or even also Levi-Strauss found a way of replicating this in all sorts of areas in what he called Klein's groups, a term, its opposite, and then their inversions. And it looks more or less like this.
That's what she adopted for.
Right,
Yeah.
and so I think that those kinds of schemas are very, in a way, attractive, seductive in some sense, and let's say they're like plantations, like they reiterate at a tremendous speed and in all kinds of areas. And at the same time, they create an unease even among the intellectuals that use them, or a kind of a fear that this is actually a construct that exists in its own world, so to speak. So it's a collapse in itself. So when talking about collapsing, strategies, this is really a big-time collapsing strategy, and it grafts so well to the world somehow. So I was wondering if that could be one aspect of, establishing some sort of critical dialogue with Rosalind Krauss, and on the other hand, what dirt might be in comparison. There are all kinds of dirts, obviously, but one kind of dirt could be, the shock of the print. I mean, for one, Dürer, as you quoted, the fascination of his work is like it profiles the artist, and it's in that phase where we kind of look at a scientist or a researcher or a technician, someone who's working in different sort of workshop situations, that the atelier is working in vitro, not in vivo, and have this kind of contrast between practices. But then you have that shock of seeing prints that kind of look like they feed operate as some kind of premise to the original. Like the trace becomes, it kind of calls for originality before the original, so to speak. I mean, this kind of deconstructive relationship that you find between writing and language, then it starts informing language, and because of this relationship, then writing takes new ways. So in this relationship, I mean, dirt might have a concrete a relationship to what Päivike was talking about, that the activity of printing and the expanding of printing is in a way looped, are kind of interdependent somehow. So I'm just wondering if there are some similarities in looking at the matrixiality of printing in its relationship to painting that has some points in common with this kind of collapsing object that we saw that we see in Rosalind Krauss's article, and some other aspects that actually belong to I mean, the dirt logic of the art field. And hence it's kind of very inspiring and probably lots of lopsided aspects to it and trap holes in relationship to artistic research. You know, that it's a kind of interesting and tricky subject that we've been opening up by having this conference. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is always, the minute we go to talk about something, we simplify it. The minute we try to make a logical argument about it, we simplify it further. By the time we've got a diagram, we're dealing with, you know, a tiny thread through the reality of what's going on. And I think, you know, you said there's all kinds of dirt. Exactly. That's, you know, there's dirt in terms of the physicality of production. There's dirt in terms of the way the logic of operations guides particular thinking. There's, you know, it's limitless. And I think the only solution, I mean, one solution would be that we stop talking about anything. But we're humans, so that's never going to happen. The other solution is that we always make sure that whatever we're saying, we understand is just one possible thread that doesn't necessarily have any more legitimacy than any other, and may look really good one day, and the next day you wake up and go, oh, Christ, I said that? So, you know, we're not a field that has falsifiability. We don't get to run experiments and prove that somebody's statement that Wade Guyton is or is not a painter or printer is true or false. It doesn't, you know, all we get to do is argue.
Yeah. I mean, he is a printer and he is a painter.
Yeah.
It's sometimes the feeling like one has to choose between, well, it fits these criteria, it must be this. I think things are full of contradictions. They're also full of sympathies. And I think sometimes something can be more than one thing at the same time.
Yeah, I think the problem is because maybe some people are looking the printmaking as referring to other media, such as paintings, sculpture, but printmaking has its own language, its own nature. So every artist is open to create from this nature. So printmaking is not necessarily related to an original. It can be the original itself. So I found very powerful the printmaking process. So it's something that each artist can find in the way to communicate and express things. So
I always think, you know, that what's interesting with the whole process concerning prints is that the artist is not only alone. You know, of course, every artist is an island, but the sea around it is very active here because you have the workshop with specialized people, maybe working with different techniques, with paper, etc., etc. So you have a whole range of people you collaborate with. And I've always thought that, you know, if you could use this dimension, you know, maybe open up for a theoretical part in the workshops, especially at the schools, you know, like this academy here, you know, where you have integrated theory and the manual work in the studios and in the workshops. That maybe could be a way of, you know, more like short-time workshops, you know, we have specialized people coming in, but that there are people who really are working with this side as well, as a parallel, you know. I think that could have, maybe that would do something. But I think we've touched it several times in this seminar, that the collective in some way is very activated through this process. I mean, we have Clipper, he's doing it in his way, sneaking around, but doing very nice stuff for the public, okay? And you have Hilary Powell's wonderful book. I just thought that was great. You know, this way of working in a local situation, using, I mean, if you want to do an activist thing, like, look, at you with your students. Well, you could change all of Bergen if there's something you don't like, you know? I mean, you have what you do, and you have the books. You can make, what's it called, plakater. You can make, yeah, posters. You can be everywhere, you know. So you have a wonderful instrument for communication. So, okay, that's just my kind of thing. You want to say something, Jan?
A short comment.
Okay.
I enjoyed very much, yeah, that
Sorry.
was Susan's, your speech concerning the retracing the diagram of Rosenklaus. But I just want to comment that, as I mentioned the first day, that they recently had a seminar where they were retracing the diagram, and at that point they also invited artists, among others Mary Miss, who found it somewhat ironic being referred to in the essay, that this diagram was so structuralist. And Benjamin Buchloh, he wanted Loris Wiener to be, that Rosenklaus had missed Lawrence Wiener and the artist book. and I mean, Mi Van Kwon in the same occasion, all that was left out, phenomenology, a lot of things that was not there, but the attraction, we must not forget the attraction at the time was that it catched. It was something that filled the need for an explanation.
What is your question, Olga, please?
It was no question. It was a comment on the fact that Theo mentioned that this is attractive as a diagram, but I think we ought to know, since you don't use that expression expanded field without referring to Rosenklaus. And the fact that it has been a rethinking of the diagram, I found it interesting in this context, especially when it has to do with printing. And the Benjamin Buchloh said that the Lawrence Wiener is not there. Yeah. So
she gave you a verbal flower there. That's good.
I actually think it would be a great knitting diagram. I think everybody should have Argyle socks made from the expanded field diagram.
Okay. Last questions from the students? Yes? And then we round up with the group here. Bra, Hege, tack.
Hi, my name is Toril Stray, and I'm an artist. And I wanted to ask Susan, I thought you were touching upon something really interesting we're talking about, maybe we're at the end of the digital age, and you mentioned the re-emphasis of materialism. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could reflect upon that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And how that could maybe affect the print as we know it.
Yeah. I don't think we're at the end of the digital age.
Yeah, well,
I think we're getting hipper to the limits of what can be communicated in a digital image. And I think it's in art schools in the States, for example, or when I look at the things that come into art and print, or sitting on juries, all of a sudden there's this huge uptick in mezzotint, reduction lino cuts, even engraving periodically, younger artists are doing, of very things that require real mastery and real understanding of materials. I think one of my favorite things is if you do like a Google image search of typography, what you get is all of these very, very slick images. You can't even tell if they're printed or ever were printed or if they're just digital. And you do the same Google search under letterpress, and everything is shot at an angle so that you can see the raking light and you can see the embossment, and all the paper is this thick. And there's this sense of a real desire for things that are tactile. And I think, letterpress in the old days, embossing the paper was a huge no-no because you can't read the text on the back if it's embossed. But now, things that have some actual materiality, there's just a real hankering for it. I mean, you see it in the maker community. You see people trying to figure out how the stuff of our world comes together in, you know, it's the dirt, right? It's the actual stuff. And yeah, I see a lot of that. And even things that are theoretically immaterial, video installations, so on and so forth, more and more they're embedded in like an architectural construct in such a way that they're physical.
I think we have to, Jan is looking very excited over there, so I think we have to round it all up. But thank you. A big hand to our panel. Thank you. And tomorrow, see you tomorrow, we'll have a semi-royal touch as well.
Okay, we'll be running.